the meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Ending Poverty in Los Angeles. First of all, John, is Irene here? Yeah, if she could sit right there, that would be fine. The Ad Hoc Committee on Ending Poverty is an extension of some work that I initiated in the State Senate and through the support of President Garcetti and the City Council, we established a committee, sort of select committee, to investigate this issue. Recognizing the fact that Los Angeles is probably ground zero in the state of California for issues related to poverty, and as city leaders, we obviously believe we have a responsibility to tackle the issue. This document that will be produced as a result of the series of hearings and the committee's work in general will hopefully be a living document for the people of Los Angeles to use to give guidance and advice relative to how we can focus our energies toward the notion of reducing and even eliminating poverty throughout the city of Los Angeles. And hopefully it will be a model document for other jurisdictions as well. First of all, let me say that we are hoping that we are able to transcend some of the typical notions about poverty and get to some of the real core issues that have faced us for so long. And we may or may not be tackling these issues, but we aren't necessarily tackling them in the context of poverty and the impact on poverty. So while we may have an economic development strategy, do we have an economic development strategy that's necessarily focused on poverty poverty reduction as a goal? Not necessarily. Also, this document is not about the City of Los Angeles government alone. This document, the purpose of this document is to make recommendations that go far beyond the City of Los Angeles government responsibilities, and we will be making recommendations for the educational system, for corporate America, for the business community, for other elements of our society, because poverty is everybody's responsibility, is everybody's burden, and if we're going to eliminate it wherever we find it, we must have typically a community of concerns converge to make that happen. So first of all, let me thank Councilmember Wendy Gruhl and Councilmember Herb Wesson, who, by the way, as Speaker of the Assembly, was the first, one of the first, John Burton being the very first, and Assembly Member, then Speaker Wesson, being the second person to endorse my select committee to draft a master plan to end poverty in California. So he is well aware of the effort that I've been involved with, and so it was very much my pleasure to ask President Garcetti to have him serve on this committee. But we want to thank them. This, as we said, this is a document that I hope this council will enjoy as a product of their good work. A couple of concepts I want to present to you. We have a series of presenters who will be responding to drafts that have been developed by my staff. In particularly, I want to commend and thank the interns from USC. I don't want to offend any other colleges, Ms. Gruhl, but we did reach out to the major universities in the area, and amazingly, USC stepped forward. And I say amazing not because they stepped forward, but because so many talented students wanted to participate in this project. 6 interns have participated in this project, and all are tackling different issues. This issue today, this document, the document on economic development, community and economic development, was actually developed in huge measure by Irene Fung, who had just graduated from USC with her master's degree, and I just think, and you're going to be going to
Indonesia.
Where?
Indonesia.
She's going to Indonesia to actually do some great work in the area of the tsunami, but she is going to do this project as much as possible, and And yes, we do have the web, and she's going to stay on this project. These students are very, very committed to this project. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the substance of this project. And so, are the other interns here? Can we just have you stand up? I just want everybody to acknowledge. You'll get to meet. You know, it's not as if when you're a college student, you go to a college thinking, well, I'm gonna end poverty. But these students have come together and have really, with complete eyes open, with all the passion and excitement of that possibility, to help us put this document together. So I first want to thank them, of course, my staff. The document, whether it's economic development, education, healthcare, whatever issue we are presenting to you, these are living documents. The idea of having presenters is for them to review these documents in detail and give us their best shot at how to improve these documents, so that when we complete the various sections, we will have a document that will be most beneficial to the city of Los Angeles. I know Ms. Gruhl has to leave very quickly, so I'm gonna finish as briefly as can, or take her comments in between. That's my phone. Don't worry about it. So, first of all, one of the notions that we want to deal with is the issue of the myths about poverty. And we want to fully explore some myths about poverty so that we can focus people's understanding on how to solve it. One of the simplest myths I can think of is the myth that the federal poverty guidelines are the definition of poverty. For example, a family of four, $21,600 is the limit, is the cap on defining poverty for a family of four in the city of Los Angeles. What's the same cap in Alabama, Georgia, or anywhere else in the United States except certain states like Hawaii? But the fact of the matter is, in order to live in Los Angeles and be self-sufficient, you have to make somewhere for that same family about $54,000 to $72,000, depending on your circumstances. So we have the federal poverty guideline is in and of itself a myth. And we want to explore the feasibility of these myths, or actually recommendations relative to these myths, and open people's eyes. So, for example, I sent a letter to all the presidential candidates asking them to commit to changing the federal poverty guidelines. I can tell you that one of the candidates who is running for president is committed. We have a letter saying that he would work to change the federal poverty guidelines to have a more regional approach and recognize the differences of economics. And all I can say is that that we would applaud Senator Obama for making that commitment. Senator McCain did not make that commitment, just for the record. The other thing that I want to mention is that we will conduct working groups where we will have other communities of interest come together on different subjects to also explore improving these documents. But my staff has put together a document based on input from a lot of different sources, including numerous hearings that I held at the state level, as well as interviews that were conducted around the state and also in Los Angeles with people on the streets in conditions of poverty and just walking down the street, getting their opinions on poverty. But so we will be conducting working groups, and in those groups we hope to hone in on more or less the final document that would emerge. We're also looking for anecdotes. We think that we don't want to create a document that is so academic that you really don't understand the story about poverty. So we are going to incorporate in this document anecdotes to tell the story of real people. We've also, we're reaching out to authors, people like Mike Davis, Ariana Huffington, and they have committed to participating in helping us write some of these anecdotes and also telling the story of poverty from their perspective. And we're working with them on some of those concepts. So at the end of the day, we hope to have a document that not only describes poverty, not only provides recommendations for poverty response at the city level, but in the diverse arenas that it could be impacted. But we also want to tell the story of real human lives that are affected by poverty. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Wendy Gruhl. She does have another commitment and has to leave, but I would like to accept her comments. And obviously, my colleagues will be presented with the drafts, and of course, we'll have access to the testimony that is provided. We would appreciate your testimony in writing if at all possible, but we appreciate your input however you may have it.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Alarcon, and we've had the pleasure of working together, which I don't know if we want to admit how many years, but it's been 20 plus years where we were both in Mayor Bradley's office working on, both of us, you in the Office of Criminal Justice Planning, and I worked for the mayor on issues of homelessness and housing and economic development. And I too actually have USC interns, even though I'm a Bruin, a couple of them actually. So glad that their willingness to do this. And as I started off as an intern in the mayor's office 20 plus years ago, it is a good opportunity to see where you can make a difference, and this kind of document and policy you're drafting is critical to that. And I think there's no better time in which talking about the issue of poverty is on the tips of everyone's tongue, and it's unfortunate that it takes the kind of crisis we've had with the mortgage crisis, gas prices being so high, that people are focusing on poverty because it's existed for many years. When the numbers of homelessness, individuals are greater than 80,000 in our region, but it's now on the front pages of the paper. And yesterday about the food banks and that they're not accepting more people. And it's sad to say that many kids go hungry to school every single day, and we need to do more. And it is a responsibility, as Mr. Alarcon mentioned, for all of us at every single level. And it is a position of not only government but nonprofit sector, private sector, to come up with some of the solutions. There is no quick fix, and there is no simple solution. It is one in which it means we need to address the issues of affordable housing. We need to address the issues of health care. We need to address the issues of workforce housing and training programs and all of that to deal with the issues of poverty. And I think it's seizing this moment where people are focused on it. I can remember during my years at HUD and working on the issue of homelessness, and it was only when a woman died across the street from HUD at the Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C., that there was a lot of coverage about the homeless issue. And it's unfortunately only those instances when there is a crime committed or a story that gets people into action. But whatever it takes, and the fact that we're doing this now in the leadership of Mr. Alarcon and chairing this committee, I think speaks volumes about our interest. And I just want to thank those of you who have just received this document and look forward to making comments and talking about some of the things that are important to us, and the role that the federal and the state and local government and the county government play in trying to address those issues. And so you have a stellar group of people who are speaking today, some of which I've known for a very long time as well, who are going to talk to you about some of those parts of addressing the issue of poverty, but want to commit to you, Mr. Alarcon, my interest in doing this, and my challenge with a scheduling issue today and not being able to stay does not mean I'm not interested in this, and will follow the testimony, and staff will be here to listen as well. And I know this is just the beginning of a very important dialogue, and more importantly, action that we need to take to address the issue of poverty here in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When Wendy Gruhl was Undersecretary in Housing and Urban Development, I can't imagine what would have happened after the earthquake had it not been for the work that was done by Wendy, as well as the Secretary, Mr. Cisneros, and the Clinton administration to put our city back together. I can tell you in my own experience, numerous housing projects were redeveloped. The General Motors plant development was developed as part of a $4 million economic development grant that was directly tied to the aftermath of the earthquake. And had it not been for Wendy's leadership in protecting Los Angeles, I guarantee you we would be in a very different condition today in response to the earthquake. And having seen the response in New Orleans, I can tell you that it makes all the difference in the world when the federal administration really cares and focuses on that disaster response. So that's why I asked Mr. Garcetti if she would be willing to participate in this committee because of her experience with housing and urban development under the Clinton administration. Even more than the work you did with the city of Los Angeles. That's just icing on the cake, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I know you have other responsibilities. With that, I'd like to just mention a couple of concepts that my interns and I have had numerous discussions, and the first one is, can you really end poverty? Well, it is not unusual for a governmental group to want to strive to end poverty. In fact, I think the most prominent in the last 50 years was the effort by Sergeant Shriver to create the war on poverty under the Kennedy administration, we all recognize at this point that he was not successful in the ultimate mission, but at the same time, in the process, the Peace Corps was developed, the Head Start program was developed, the war on poverty was developed. Numerous agencies emerged out of that war on poverty. Even his wife's development of the Special Olympics was part and parcel of this goal to create a better society, but beginning with the whole notion of ending poverty. So we've tried these efforts before. Social Security was not always provided. It was part of the goal to end poverty for seniors and elderly who had worked so hard for many years. It wasn't always there, but it emerged, that discussion emerged out of the challenge to end poverty that largely came out of California in the EPIC movement, the End Poverty in California movement in the 1930s under Upton Sinclair, who at the time ran for governor under that ticket. The GI Bill allowed returning soldiers who went to war to save democracy, came back with limited resources. We created the GI Bill not only to enable them with the opportunities to go to school, to improve their potential, but we also gave them the ability to purchase homes. And I think when you think of those things, not only the treatment of our veterans today, but the notion of a quality education and the returns that we get as a society from that education, as well as the asset building notion, which is incorporated into this particular document today, of owning a home and the benefits that come to society, not just the individual, from having a high rate of home ownership are well known. So those are some of the notions that I think we need to re-explore, re-examine, and maybe re-advance in new and innovative ways. So these are some of the things that we hope that history will, if nothing else, will say that this is something that needs to be done. It needs to be constant, and we constantly have to recognize that we need to move away from this notion that poverty is just going to be there. And I've had people tell me there's always going to be poverty, and I said, well, as long as you say that, it's true. But I don't happen to believe that, because if you end poverty for one, you've ended poverty, and if you can end it for one, you can end it for more, and you can end it for all. Right now, we are looking at 7 chapters of what we call actionable items. We don't want just, as I said, an academic paper to sit on the shelf and collect dust. We're going to be making recommendations for all sectors. We're looking for partners. Please participate. And of course, as I said, we want to debunk the myths of poverty. We're expecting to have a hearing on each one of these 7 hearings, at least, unless we add another chapter during the course of our hearings. Right now, we're looking at community economic development, labor and industrial relations, infrastructure and housing, education, transportation, health, and public safety. Those are the 7 focuses that we anticipate now, but we will explore others if we get more volunteers from USC. No, I'm just kidding. Today's panels will provide an update on poverty in Los Angeles, but not just looking at, one of the myths about poverty is that the first thing you think about poverty is the homeless guy that's downtown on the street. But poverty is much more ephemeral than that. The average stay in poverty is 2.5 years. Most people think it's a lifelong or generational. It's not. It's a very short term for most people. If we can address those people's issues, then we can and the response and sort of the safety net that we provide for people societally, we can have a tremendous impact on reducing poverty. Home ownership is also an issue that is under the economic development realm. We believe that everybody who owns a home is more stable because they have flexibility to deal with life's tragic experiences that occur in just about every family. And that the home ownership is a stabilizing force. This foreclosure crisis that we've seen in the last 2 years, which, by the way, affects Sylmar in my district more than any other community in Los Angeles City. I think it's the third ranked in the region in terms of communities hit by foreclosures. And I've seen personally, I talk to people personally, if I go to the Vallarta market, if I go to the bowling alley, people will tell me about being in a condition where they're losing their home. Or conversely, a young couple will be buying a foreclosed property at a greatly reduced price. The point being that we need to focus on home ownership and the expansion of home ownership as a goal. Also, a focus that we think, particularly in the city of Los Angeles, is the micro enterprise and small business community. Micro enterprises are those businesses with fewer than 5 employees. Small businesses are somewhere in between. It goes up to, 250 employees maybe, or even 1,000.
Everybody has a different standard.
Yeah. So Albert is gonna explain to us how to define some of those small business things. But I can tell you this. The vast majority of new businesses created in the state of California and especially in Los Angeles are created by first of all, first generation immigrants, secondly, women, and the sad fact is that 90% of them fail within the first year. We know through, and one of the testifiers will be the Valley Economic Development Center, we know that with assistance that businesses have higher success rates and they go far beyond a 10% success rate. And so we want to further the efforts to support small businesses as a way to protect Los Angeles from creating poverty. It's not just the businesses that lose when they go out of business. It's all the employees and the families that are connected to that. And so with that, I'd like to start with the testimony, and our first presenter I didn't see Professor Valenzuela. Oh, there he is, way in the back. Okay, Professor Abel Valenzuela from UCLA. He is a specialist on the issue of poverty. He will be covering economic and social conditions facing low-income communities, low-income urban communities. We also have Marguerite Womack from the United Way of Greater Los Angeles. They have been developing and for many years have presented documents on poverty, and of course their history is renowned, and they are absolutely key partners to our effort to write an effective document. And I've told both of them that we want you to tell us how to make this document better. But we also want it to be human. And so first let me ask Dr. Valenzuela for your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here in the city of my birth. I also want to thank you for your leadership. I know you've been doing this for many, many years. In fact, I think it spans at least a decade, because I recall you had similar committee hearings in Sacramento, and I recall flying out there and sharing with you some of my thoughts on the poverty threshold definition and some of the problems with that. I won't address that, but I'll certainly begin my comments by stating that counting poor people, even with all of our technology and know-how, really it's an imperfect science. And I think that the best example is how our federal government sets the poverty threshold, the poverty line, which is basically based on a food plan and an economic food plan which was developed in the 1960s in the Department of Agriculture, of all places. And even back then, many people had problems with basing the federal threshold, poverty threshold, on a food plan. But nonetheless, we still, for the most part, base our definition in that same manner. And as a result, we get yearly figures of the number of poor people that's established by the federal government. Most researchers are critical of this threshold, and as a result, they'll do one particular trick, or not a trick, but a massaging of the number. And what they'll do is they'll increase the percentage. So oftentimes you'll hear the poverty threshold at 100%, or whatever it is that the poverty threshold is, or at 150%, or at 200%. And the reason they do that is because they really believe that that more accurately captures the number of poor people. So for example, in 2007, and these data come from United Way, there was about 1.6 million Angelenos in the greater Los Angeles area that lived below the poverty threshold. 1.6 million. This is LA County. So if you adjust to 200% of the federal poverty line, which comes about $42,000 or so, right, based on a family of four, the number of poor residents in LA County more than doubles, up to 3.7 million people. That's a lot of poor people living in LA County at that rate. 1.6 million at the regular poverty rate, which is for a family of four about $21,500 or so.
Why wouldn't the federal government want to change?
Why wouldn't they?
I remember making a presentation to a bunch of, actually it was to Howard Dean. He was running for president, and I asked him about the federal poverty rate. Believe it or not, at that time, he said, you know, I've never heard that before. I don't know. It's probably very complicated. And there were 5 congressional members there. And when I said that it's actually very simple, 3 times the cost of food for the average size of a given, or size of a given family, and all the congressional members were nodding their heads. They knew what it was, and they all agreed that it needed to be changed. So why is it that we haven't been able to create the impetus to change the federal poverty gap?
Well, I think it's fundamentally political. I think whenever if it ever does change, the numbers of poor people in our country may double, for example. And so if it changes under the current administration, Republicans may very well be blamed, for example, for the increase in the number of poor people.
But since the 60s...
It's short-sighted. It really makes no sense to think about that.
Democrats have been in power numerous times with a Democratic president, and they still didn't change the
And they still did not, right.
Do you think that perhaps as you're a tenured congressional leader and you figure out the system and you incorporate 300% into your bill to affect your particular district, that perhaps you can play the system a little better than to have a clear light on what poverty is across the nation, and therefore maybe sway the dollars to go to somebody who has a greater need, who might not vote as much?
Right. No, I'm in complete agreement. I would hope that a new administration would think thoughtfully. And there's been many scholars who have written on this very issue and have proposed different ways of defining the poor folks that wouldn't necessarily place blame on a current administration, for example.
Well,
so this is something that has been discussed.
We've had this conversation. In fact, we had this conversation in a filmed interview, and that was that the ability to shed light on poverty affects how we distribute federal dollars going to poverty. If we do not have a clear light on what poverty is, we have no idea what we're spending money on. We're probably wasting a ton of money in some places and not spending enough in others. The other thing that amazes me, what I've learned in this process, is that you can actually go into an individual family and with a few simple questions discern whether they are poor, and you can adjust it for a family of 4 with 2 parents. You can adjust it based on the age of the children, and with the high-tech society that we're in, you can actually calculate with great precision whether somebody meets a self-sufficiency standard or a poverty standard, whatever the standard may be. And yet, we take a very lazy approach to come up with these figures that actually are so far below what the real poverty level is in Los Angeles in particular as compared to Alabama. And yet, they're low in Alabama. That's the saddest part. I think one of the challenges that we have, and one of the things that we hope to incorporate into the document, is that we have that that we have to change the federal poverty guidelines. And it doesn't have to be immediate, but over time, we have to get to a more realistic view of what poverty is.
Right. And there are some excellent texts on this very issue.
We appreciate
absolutely.
you referring us to those documents so that we can incorporate those into our recommendations.
Absolutely, I'd be more than happy. So the point that I was trying to make is that most poverty figures, that they underestimate the total number of poor people in the country, but especially in regions and in cities such as Los Angeles. To my second point, the demography of poor people varies, but clearly women and children suffer the most. So of the 1.6 million people who live in poverty, about 600,000 of them are children. And we also know that almost 1 in 5 women in LA County, that's about 18%, live below the poverty level. We also know that beyond gender and, of course, being a child, that race and ethnicity is also an important indicator of poverty. And if we were to break up our population into just 4 simple categories, right? White, black, Latino, and Asian, and we know our city is much more diverse than that, and that many ethnicities exist in between these categories. That of these 4 categories, they're all pretty well represented in the ranks of the poor in Los Angeles. We do, however, know that Latinos and African Americans are more likely to be poor, with rates 2.5 times as great as those of non-Hispanic whites. So it's an important point that the diversity of poverty really does vary in LA County, and that it impacts women and children, and especially Latinos. But for us to state that whites in Los Angeles are not poor is inaccurate, and also Asian Americans, in particular Southeastern Asians. The working poor. Poverty, I think, is, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, it's often blamed on idleness or unemployment or homelessness. And we know that some of these factors, or some of these characteristics rather, they do contribute to the ranks of the poor. But many people are poor even though they are working, and oftentimes they're working full-time year-round. Some of the factors that contribute to the working poor includes the growth of part-time work, low wages, bad jobs. These 3 factors explain why residents in LA County who work still find themselves in poverty. And let me give you just a couple of data points. Almost 1/3 of the county's 3 million full-time workers earned less than $25,000 per year. So you can see that that's slightly above a family of 4 in terms of the federal poverty threshold. We also know that the median family income in Los Angeles County is about $57,000. That's much lower than the state of California's median income, which is at about $64,500, and the nation as a whole, which comes in at about $58,526. So clearly, LA County as a whole, the median family income is much lower than that of our country, and certainly that of our state. If the types of jobs that exist...
In actual dollars? Or?
Those are in actual dollars, yes. If the type of jobs that exist in Los Angeles County and the current state of our economy, which we all know isn't doing very well, if that is an indicator of the future, I think things don't look very well. They actually look quite bleak. And let me give you just 2 quick examples. 5 of the 10 occupations in LA County which are most projected for growth, for new jobs, they provide low wages, and they include food service workers, they include sales associates, and transportation workers. We know that future job growth projections suggest that low-wage occupations will continue to play an important role in our economy here in Los Angeles, right? So all of the projections that many different economists, labor economists in particular, they all project that most of our growth sectors are in jobs that don't pay very well. We also know that many of these jobs aren't organized, that they don't have union support, they have high rates of turnover, they don't provide benefits to their workers, and so of course that also adds to one's despair in our city. Finally, I think one of the most important industries in our county is in the leisure and hospitality industry. Just last year, it added somewhere upwards of 70,000 jobs. The average pay per year comes in at about $26,600. This is according to the California Employment Development Department. So again, you see another growth industry, leisure and hospitality, growing, but again, it's not providing the types of jobs and income that allows a family of four to really escape the difficulties of poverty. So to close on this one section, poverty is much more than idleness. It's participants, as I've just stated, are hardworking, employed men and women in this city. Let me speak a little bit about the geography of poverty in LA County. We know that Los Angeles is vast and it's varied, and that there are huge differences in communities between the haves and the have-nots. For example, and this is just one quick example, there is a sevenfold difference in the median family income across communities in LA County, from around $23,000 in this area, or the Westlake downtown area, just west of downtown, to over $163,000 in the west side of Los Angeles. And of course, I'm referring to communities such as Malibu, the Pacific Palisades, Brentwood, and of course parts of Beverly Hills. So you can see that median income really does differ in our city. And if you're from Los Angeles, of course, I don't think this needs to necessarily be stated. We can see that on a regular basis. As an assignment for my students, I'll have them take the bus from Westwood, just south of UCLA campus, and they'll take the bus all the way down Wilshire Boulevard to downtown Los Angeles. And of course, it just traverses Beverly Hills, and it enters the Pico Union District, MacArthur Park, and ends nearby City Hall. It's a wonderful exercise because you can visually see and picture Los Angeles and its, of course, diverse population, but also its very diverse economic class.
You know, it would be great if you could put together an anecdote about that.
Sure.
About the trip from Wilshire, that maybe your students could give some of their examples of the things that struck them.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
We'd love to incorporate something like that into this document.
You know, in the fall quarter, I'm teaching a course entitled Poverty Issues in Los Angeles. And so maybe it makes sense for us to have a conversation to see if we can't do something a little bit more focused, perhaps similar to what the USC students did, and see if we can't produce something for the committee.
You got to stand up for UCLA's name here.
Indeed.
Represent.
Yes, need to
Competition
represent.
is good.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to speak with yourself and, of course, your staff to do something like that.
Thank you.
Let me just give you another few geography points, and I'm almost done. We know that the Calabasas, Agoura, Topanga Canyon area has the lowest poverty rates in the city of Los Angeles, with just about 3% of residents in those communities living below the poverty level. You need to contrast that with South Park, which is really a small community. It's almost an unfair comparison. It's within the downtown area, bordered by the 10 freeway and the 110 freeway. But that's the most impoverished community in Los Angeles, with 40% of all its residents living below the poverty area. I think a more accurate description of a concentrated poverty area would be Central and South Los Angeles communities, which would be followed by areas in the in your own community of San Fernando Valley, I think Pacoima really sticks out as an area with high concentrations of poor folks, but also places like South Long Beach and, of course, the East Antelope Valley, where I have some family, cousins who live out there. So the primary point that I want to make is that poverty is geographically dispersed, but pockets of large concentrations clearly exist. I want to quickly conclude, because I know my time is up. I really don't believe that there's a single policy or a unilateral approach to eradicating poverty in LA County. Any approach, I believe, should be holistic in nature, and I think a good starting point would be a focus on our local and our regional economy. And I came up with just a few points, but I think I'll pass because they're very consistent with the draft that I read, at least the executive summary that I read, which focuses on both individuals and, of course, on structural, broader, macro and micro issues, which I think are really important. The point being that they be holistic, that they be varied, and that they not be just focused on the government, but involve nonprofit organizations, involve the business sector, involve academics and others. I also believe that we can indeed eradicate poverty. We can. We have the know-how. We have the technological capability. We just need the will, and sure enough, there are folks out there that do have that will to do that.
I believe so, and I appreciate that comment. And in fact, we need to incorporate that notion into the document, if nowhere else into the introduction. The whole idea that will can change not only direction, but it can change history.
Right.
In the future.
You know, we actually have a historical period where inequality actually became less so in our country, and that's when the federal government actually invested millions of dollars. And back then, we did not know as much about what works and what doesn't work as we do now. A lot more smart people, I think, now that can come up with creative solutions.
I hope so. The one thing
to do this.
The document, I want to say this publicly, but the document, I really wanted to focus with the myths as the guide. You know, one of the myths is that people who work full-time are not poor.
Right.
And in our society, that's just not the case. In fact, it may be the case that a majority of the jobs in Los Angeles are poverty jobs. And so we have to have a discussion about the wages, but in the context of the myth, so that to do a document that merely states what poverty is and make recommendations therefrom doesn't really do anything new or innovative. What we really need to do is change the way society thinks in order to enable people to believe they can accomplish a goal, to therefore create the political will and the desire to make it happen. To just present a document with a bunch of numbers and information doesn't really light the fire that's necessary. We need to tell them that what they thought isn't what's true, and if they knew what was true, they may do something about it. They may increase their workers' wages. They may give them a health benefit. If they knew that they were participating in the creation of poverty, but they may not know that. And so that's the kind of, it's not just political will, it's will of the corporate sector, it's will of the labor sector, it's will of the educational sector. But you're absolutely right. We're all in this together, and I do believe, as you, that we can improve. So thank you so much, and we're looking forward to continue that partnership and getting those interns from UCLA. Our next speaker is Marguerite Womack from the United Way of Greater Los Angeles, and we appreciate, of course, the United Way's work historically, but they've gone through some transitions over the last 10 years since I was a board member of the United Way, and I can say that that their focus has been on poverty since that change. I don't know that we need to go heavily into that, but the fact is that they've been producing numerous documents and a couple in particular, to explore the issues of poverty and what we can do about it. So we appreciate your being here, and thank you for participating and agreeing to be a partner in this endeavor.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you for creating this committee to take on this really important task, because like you said, it was just a couple of years ago that the United Way also brought together researchers and experts from the field to help us to develop a plan to fight poverty. And in fact, we were counseled not even to use the term poverty because it brought up negative connotations of people who are homeless and people who are on welfare. And yet, in fact, we know that the face of poverty has really changed. The working poor are with us like no time before. And as you know, I don't have to go over what you just went over. Thank you very much. I'm going to cut my comments pretty short. But with the official poverty definition being based on food alone, it really doesn't make sense. It doesn't take into account the idea that we now have two working parents. And so that increases the cost of food and transportation and childcare. And that's not reflected in that number. So thank you for bringing that up as well. And perhaps in a way of looking at that and calculating it, not just basing it on food, but really looking at it, what it takes to survive, especially in a city like Los Angeles, and a measure that could be regionalized, as you suggested. One of the organizations that has done a lot of work in that area is the National Economic Development Law Center, now called Insight, and I'll be happy to get that information to your staff. And when we look at what it actually takes to survive in Los Angeles, we see that the poverty thresholds are probably 2 to 3 times lower than they really should be. And one of the thresholds we looked at is the California Budget Project. And according to the federal government, as you said, it takes about 20,650 for a family of 4. But when we look at the cost of housing, food, childcare, health care, transportation, taxes, it comes to at least $51,000 for a family of 4 if one parent is working, and $74,000 if both parents are working. So one of the ways that we have decided to look at poverty and to really stake our claim and say we're going to fight poverty is we're looking at 3 areas. We look at the area of basic needs. That's our safety net, housing, and health care. We're particularly concerned with the lack of affordable housing. In a city where 60% of our households are renters, we clearly need to provide more incentives to preserve and build more affordable rental housing. House ownership is important, and it is definitely a great asset and goal. But in reality, with 60% of our residents renting, we need to look at what that would mean for them and how working on that could actually help to lift them from poverty.
Most urban planners, I think, would argue that in order for a community to be healthy, the home ownership ratio should be around 56 to 60%.
That's my understanding.
By contributing to this notion that we need to create affordable housing that is rental, aren't we exacerbating problems of poverty? If indeed one of the biggest problems of poverty is the result of a single event, a tragic accident, a cancer, a divorce, and if the parties that experience that tragic event are renting, doesn't it just exacerbate their life? I mean, shouldn't we be more focused on home ownership?
I think home ownership is certainly one avenue, but just as you said, when we're talking about a holistic approach, and we're talking about jobs that don't pay wages that will allow us to even save for a down payment, let alone make a mortgage payment, we need to consider that as well, because we have different levels.
I understand. I was shocked when I asked the CRA how much did they spend for one apartment unit, and they told me $200,000 to $400,000 per unit to develop an apartment. $200,000 to $400,000 would buy a house in Sylmar, a nice brand new home. Why would we not buy a family that is in need of housing a brand new home instead of giving them a temporary situation where they have to pay rent for the rest of their life and never accumulate an asset from which they can rely on to get them through their elder years, or to get a collateral loan when some event occurs that they need to pay for, or to help them get some assistance for their child to go to college.
Well, I think you see now that,
I'm being a devil's advocate,
Yeah, sure.
intentionally, because I think that we continue to make this argument that rental housing is the way out of poverty. I believe that if we continue to expand rental housing in Los Angeles to proportions of higher than 60% now, arguably somewhere between 31 and 40%, that we're only going to be contributing to a spiraling down effect, because we will not have created a society that can rely on itself.
well, and that's why one of the other areas that I work on is home ownership and the individual development accounts with match savings to help increase the home ownership. We also work on foreclosure. So while owning a home may help in certain areas, as you can see right now, that was not the best way, because perhaps some people moved into that without full knowledge or didn't really understand what it would take. So, I mean, like you're talking about the holistic approach and really understanding not only what we could do on a corporate or community level, but also on an individual level, that's all important.
Well, clearly the people gamed the system, but the fundamental problem was the prices were too high.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a part that we're going to have to take a look at as well.
So down payment assistance might go a long way. A lot of the families might not be able to, they can afford the month, they're paying monthly rent, which is equivalent to the cost of a low-priced house, and yet they can't come up with a down payment.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
I really think that we need to challenge our thinking about housing and think globally, think societally. Are we contributing to our society? Are we contributing to making people more secure by increasing the proportion of rental in our city? Or should we have a goal to reduce the proportion of rental and establish true opportunities for economic security for families?
And focus more on the affordability of the rental housing that we have. That's another area that we really want to consider, to make sure that the rental is still affordable and not the same cost of a mortgage. But we're also looking at education, which
By the
we
way,
know...
I do want to point out, I chaired the Senate Committee on Housing, and I created the Cal Home Program for California, which helped develop some 70 or 80,000 houses, home ownership opportunities in the state of California. The will has to be there. Governor Davis had the will to sign the bill to make that happen. And I do believe we can create these kinds of opportunities, and we can do it on a city level as well. But we keep falling into this trap that rental housing is the way to go, and I really believe that we are only exacerbating our long-term problem.
Very good. One of the other areas we work in is education. And of course,
Absolutely.
education is one of the best antidotes to help people stay out of poverty. And I was glad to see some of that in your report as well.
We could use your help, because I know that United Way has been very involved in the notion of financial literacy.
Yes.
And I believe that our school system has completely failed us in terms of the advancing the cause of financial literacy. Our kids are not, I went to several graduations in the last couple of weeks, and I was asking high school graduates, did you ever learn what interest rates were? Did you ever learn how to do a checkbook? Did you ever learn how to borrow to buy a house? And the answer was constantly no.
Yeah.
In fact, I have not met a student who said, and this is very anecdotal, maybe half dozen kids, but not one could tell me that yes to any of those questions. And I think the United Way can be very helpful. One of the recommendations I can guarantee you will be that the state legislature needs to get off the dime to require financial literacy and set certain standards. If you could give us some advice on what those standards should be. Should they know what a loan is? Should they know how to handle a checkbook? Should they? I think that's much, and I've been criticized for this, but I think that's much more important than algebra. which a small segment of our population will use on a daily basis for the rest of their life, but the rest of us never used it, even though we took it. And so, I would have much rather had a course on how to manage the family budget when I was in high school. And they do it in home economics, if you remember that.
I remember.
And that's the only, and it's not required. And so financial literacy is an area that I think United Way can be very helpful, because I know that you've done quite a bit of work on that. And you also have anecdotal stories of some of the organizations that have done some of the, by the way, I used to do this for Chicana Service Access Center, which was funded by United Way. I actually used to teach young women how to do a budget, how to do a checkbook, how to get a loan, what an interest rate was, how to calculate it. And I really believe that should be incorporated into our school system as a requirement. So I would appreciate any information you have on that.
We're actually right now working with the FDIC as well as the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco to create a more comprehensive program, and one that is throughout the county. And it's something that we're working on at this time. We've been working on financial education for families for some time already. For the last 8 years, we've been working with our individual development accounts. We're incorporating financial education into our earned income tax credit and tax preparation programs, as well as our workforce development programs. So instead of just saying this goes along with a savings account or checking account,
Exactly.
It goes along with everything, and it should be core, like you said. And one of the areas in workforce development, that's one thing that I did not see yet in your draft. We talked about education, you talked about labor, but I didn't see a lot on job training for adults. The city has a big investment in that area, and financial education might want to be, I know that they're looking at that as being a part of those requirements as well.
Yeah, we struggle with where to put these subjects, whether they go in the education section or in the economic development. And there's going to be overlap. I agree with you. Actually, when I was looking through the document, that's one of the things I was looking for.
Okay.
And so we appreciate that comment. And we'd appreciate your assistance, actually.
I'd be happy to help you with that. We also have, we've started a funder collaborative with philanthropy here in Los Angeles. We have 6 foundations who have pooled their monies with us, and we're making investments of more than $1 million just this year. So within a year, we raised $1 million to invest right back into the city and county of Los Angeles. So, but we are taking a sector approach to that. So one of the other things that, as you're talking to labor and you're looking at the jobs that are available, to also consider looking at your key industries that you have here in Los Angeles, what they're doing, where they're going, and ways to woo them and help the businesses to stay in Los Angeles so that the jobs stay as well.
Mm-hmm.
I had a few other things, but I think time is
Strategic targeting
going.
for industry
Yeah.
is something that also needs to be incorporated into the document. We haven't been as effective. We talk a lot about, for example, biomed centers, but we really haven't been as effective as we would like to in creating those opportunities. High-paying, high-tech jobs, clean jobs that typically add great opportunities for communities. That's another thing that I think we need to focus in on. I'm going to move us forward. One question I have for you as a leader in the United Way, it's a tricky question, and that is that we constantly rely on foundations for things that seem to me should be incorporated into our public educational system, and they're not. And that places an incredible burden on you, and I would think on also the health organization, the foundations that have emerged with billions of dollars in assets, but they're strapped because an existing educational institution isn't doing some of the things that they are forced to do, and they could probably do much better things in the healthcare arena as opposed to things in the educational arena. Any thoughts on that?
Well, as we brought the foundations together and talked to them, I was interested as we looked at proposals, and they said, the government should fund that. We're not going to do that. We're not gap funding. That's not our job. And so we had to really play to help them understand why this is and why it actually is a good investment and why it's smart to align our funds with the funds of the government, because then we're leveraging both. And also to, like you said, to maybe use some of that money to do some systems change work and to see what we could do and how we can affect change so that the cities would work together, that the workforce investment boards would join together and pool their funds, or to look at things more broadly. So we do have some areas in there, but one of the things that we would love to do, and one of the things that foundations are known for, is to be innovators, to use our monies to be more thoughtful and to be more risky. We can do that, but right now we're doing a lot of gap funding, and that's not where we should be.
Well, I think that's a discussion that we should have relative to recommendations for foundation activity, and I would appreciate your input and recommendation as to who else we might want to talk to about that. That's not necessarily relative to economic development, but I had to ask you since you were here. I want to thank both of you for being here, recognize you as partners in our endeavor for actually many years, and so I want to thank you for that, but also to let everybody know that you're going to continue to partner with us and help us put together this document and continue to develop it as we go. But I do appreciate you coming down to downtown and making your statements. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Yeah. And let me know about that class on poverty. I'm very interested. Yeah. Okay, at this time I'd like to move into the panel on home ownership. We have Esther Cadavid from Los Angeles Neighborhood Housing Services to talk about the impact of homeownership in community, and also to talk about the foreclosure crisis and what that means to us as a community. Aaron Rank from Habitat for Humanity, covering the challenges and opportunities for providing affordable housing. Well, it may be in a very limited sector, but nevertheless playing a critical role, and certainly, if nothing else, creating the inspiration for the possibilities of what we can do if we set our mind to it. So with that, Esther Cadavid.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
I hope I'm not damaging your name.
No, it's Cadavid.
Oh, okay,
No,
great.
I'm actually, thank you for inviting me today. I am a product of the war on poverty. I'm a daughter of immigrant parents, born and raised here in Los Angeles, and my mother went to UCLA. She was in the Peace Corps, and I also went to UCLA. Graduate and undergrad. Anyways, and I was a Head Start student, so definitely this poverty discussion is very meaningful to me personally.
You know, I erred in my administration of this committee. I didn't realize these were listed as separate items. So I have a public comment card on item number 1, and I'm required to take that speaker first, if you don't mind. Mr. Walsh?
I would like to thank you. I'm glad I voted for you for mayor.
It was you.
We'll see who wins in the end. Just like to point out, these are very enlightening. It's really scary here to see in 1989, there's only $1,000 separating the average person in a Los Angeles family with the state. Up now, when you go to 2006, $3,000. And you look here where the riots were. You can see that's when it goes down. Look after the riots, how the average salary of a family goes way down, actually goes up a little bit. And I'd like to just point out that the subway is, and all rail transportation is predominantly working poor. I'm an exception of it. And the Times can do all they want about writing stories. In fact, I'll be brief. When the fare went up, the gas went up to $5, the ridership went up 6% on rail. That's 17,000 boardings a day, and went down 5.5% on buses. So what has happened is, as the people who were riding cars when the gas went up, the working poor got pushed onto the rail. The people who were on the rail got pushed onto the bus, and the people on the bus, and that works out to almost 7%, 6% of 1.3 million daily boardings. People are on the street. People are on the street. And what are we going to do? Build a subway to the sea. Build a subway to the sea through the La Brea tar pits. And I'd just like to point out and finish by saying, this is also incredible. There's only one thing wrong. I didn't realize that there are now in the city of Los Angeles more Asians than there are African Americans. That's incredible. But I would like you to redo this to age disparity. Because when you do age disparity, you'll find out that white people and African American people are much older on average, and Hispanic people and Asian people are much younger. And that has to do with poverty too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Welsh. I don't know anecdotally, but as you drive wherever you're driving to tonight, I've noticed more people walking, and it doesn't appear they're anywhere near a transportation hub. They're just walking, and it sort of reminds me of foreign countries I've been to where you see a lot more people walking, and they're carrying stuff, so they're going someplace. And bear me out if this is true, but just see if you notice it. Maybe I'm just hypersensitive to it, but it's just an interesting side note. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Esther, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I did provide a packet for you, and there are packets in the back. And I did want to, I'm not going to go through the data, but I did want to just highlight that your area council member is in trouble, as are a lot of the areas in the San Fernando Valley with regards to foreclosure. And
No reflection on the councilman?
no, absolutely, it's all a reflection on
Okay.
the loans that they had. And out of the 8 out of 13 areas that are the top highest in 2008, represent 8 of those areas are in the San Fernando Valley. And right now, year to date, as of end of May, we passed by hundreds the number of foreclosures we had in all of 2007 in the county and in the city. And in your area in Sylmar, we have 280 foreclosures to date, which passed the total 224 that we had last year. And that's foreclosed, gone, and that's not notice of defaults, that's done. So we're seeing that 2008 is going to be incredibly worse than it was in 2007. And so to that end, I represent Los Angeles Neighborhood Housing Services in the Center for Foreclosure Solutions, and which is a partnership of a bunch of coalitions of counseling agencies, some lenders, the public service attorneys like Bethesda, Public Counsel, Legal Aid, and we're trying to do a comprehensive approach to foreclosure. And as it relates to poverty, as you know, home ownership is the way that many families create wealth across generations. And to see the home ownership rate that we here in Los Angeles have worked so hard to build over the last 20, or my agency is 24 years old, and see it decimated with this foreclosure crisis is hard to see. And particularly when you think about the homeowner, a person's home, and how you use that to educate your kids in college, how you educate them to send them to college, you get an equity loan to maybe deal with a devastating illness. So the aging in place for seniors is very important. And as we're seeing these homes lost to foreclosures, we're seeing families thrown into homelessness. We're seeing families and children going from school to school, which then impacts their grades. The impact, and I did include also as the packet, just a few of the foreclosure factors, but I also included for you to see that maps that we got from the Federal Reserve. Thank you, Melanie. The percent of subprime loans that are going to reset in 2008, and then the hot spots. And so you can basically see for the city of Los Angeles where we're going to have the trouble. And
the notion in the marketplace of the market correcting itself drives me nuts. I mean, I wouldn't be in this business if I thought the markets were always going to correct themselves. But there seems to be this sort of sticking the head in the sand kind of mentality that, oh, the market's going to correct itself because it always does. And frankly, I don't think we've seen this kind of devastation in this particular marketplace in my lifetime.
well, with the way the statistics are going, okay, that's probably true, and maybe we'll see the upswing starting in 2007. So between now, we're in 2008. What do we do in the meantime? How many families are going to lose their homes? How many kids are going to be displaced? In
And how-
California,
And the other question is time. Of course, unless you believe that the United States system is going to fall apart, then you've got to believe that eventually whatever the problem is going to correct itself. But the question is, can we expedite that correction, or are we going to allow it to persist, and how deeply will it persist, and then how long will the ramifications of that crisis swallow up particular areas like Los Angeles, which is more heavily impacted by this crisis. I want to ask you a couple of things for commitments from you, actually. You talked about the people that you're seeing who are experiencing changes. I would really like you to either provide us with information or a story, some anecdotal stories that we can incorporate into the document that tell the real human experience.
I have hundreds. I have hundreds of stories from families.
No, but if you could either document a story, and you don't have to use the real names, or if you could have us interview some particular people who would be willing to allow their story to be told, so that what we're really trying to capture here is, in the case of foreclosures, the very first reaction to it was, well, that's just people who got into a dumb loan they should have never got into. Well, I would believe that if it was, the first 1,000 people in the United States. But when you're talking about 10% of the homeowners in the country losing their homes, that is not an issue of individual responsibility. There is a problem there that is a societal problem. So what we're really looking for in the anecdotes are those things that are counterintuitive, that you wouldn't think this person would have ended up in poverty, but somehow they ended up there, not because of their own responsibility, but because something failed them, and therefore they needed to be addressed. That's really how you could be helpful to this document.
No,
and
happy
as I've
to
said
do
so
that.
many times, putting a human face on poverty.
We can absolutely do that. And right now, I'm sorry to say that 6 out of the 10 families that we're seeing are going to lose their homes. And it's how they lose their homes. Are they going to be foreclosed, or are they going to do a short sale? Can we get their servicer, their lender, to give them a 5-year reprieve on the initial
I wasn't looking
rate?
at your map, but are you basically saying that next year's going to be worse than this year, or it's improving but it's still a problem?
No, it's not improving.
It's not
because
improving.
the number of resets, and because there's so many more loans that are to reset in June, the majority were June and September, we'll start seeing those notice of defaults and people leaving their homes.
So it's actually increasing,
By September and then December, we'll see a lot of families out of their homes.
which challenges us to engage ourselves in renegotiating loans with the banks and finding alternative means to get people through the foreclosure possibility.
I do want to say that the one thing I saw that was missing in the whole kind of housing issue was the relocation piece, because I really see that foreclosures is a public health issue. And the more homes we have that are barred, locked down, what have you, empty homes, just the same that we saw after the civil unrest and the same as we saw in the Northridge earthquakes. They're a haven for public nuisance and criminal activity.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I've got the receipt of one of the officers are asking me for the NOD so that they can, or the REO
NOD?
properties, the REO, the foreclosed properties, so they can look and
Keep an
go
eye.
around them and keep an eye on them, because they've seen an increase. Reseda is really hard hit as well. And so as we start to think about the relocation and what we can do is that, first of all, we need property owners, large property owners of multifamilies, to come to the table and to say, okay, I'm going to give this family who's been foreclosed because really their credit is now bad. Where are they going to go? Are they going to go in the streets, or are they going to leave the state? I mean, I think the homeless issue is very big for LA. So the property owners need to come to the table in terms of be willing to take foreclosure families into housing units. And relocation assistance, first and last month's rent. We're not asking for rescue funds for the mortgages, because the gap in financing is too huge, hundreds of thousands in many cases. But a $5,000 rescue fund where they can give first and last month's rent and maybe moving expenses, that really will help families as well.
But the way to think of it, the way to sell it, is not to help the family. But if we do not provide relocation possibilities, that family could end up on the street and diminishing everybody's quality of life. But I want to go back to what you said and restate what you said, maybe differently. What you said is that if the vacancies increase and are concentrated in areas, it could greatly diminish the quality of life. And we've seen that in the aftermath of the earthquake. We could see that as a result of the foreclosures.
Right.
Okay, I
The
think that's a
other-
very important point,
And the other part is
because the
that-
market is not just going to correct itself, there's going to be ramifications.
And in Los Angeles, where maybe the properties even may flip quickly, and you'll have it sold. It's an investor that's buying that property, not a homeowner. And when you have a community full of investors versus a community full of homeowners, the disinvestment to that community is significant.
Well, to
If
say,
I
to
own-
say it in a more common language, which is my language, what I'm seeing in my community are people going into the walls of abandoned houses to steal the copper.
Right.
That's a very practical effect of the vacancies in my district and throughout the city of Los Angeles. I heard about a house, a guy even lived in it, and he was wondering why he was having mosquitoes in his house. And it turned out they took all the copper from under his house, and the water was just going into the ground. So we're seeing some things that we might not have seen before, but this is one of the reasons why we have to figure out what to do with the vacancies.
Right, and I think that the cash for keys is one of the issues. I don't know if
Cash
you've
for
heard-
what?
Cash for keys, that's where the trash foreclosures, where the lenders are paying families to actually just, here, I'll give you cash just to get out and leave the house as is, so they don't trash it. The other is that I'm seeing some servicers after the foreclosure has happened, the family stay 3-6 months while they figure out what to do to list the property, so that at least there's someone in the property, keeping tabs on it, et cetera, rent-free.
We don't have any requirements in place for the owner of the property, whether it's the bank or the owner, to maintain at a certain level?
Well, the governor, as we were meeting, did sign into legislation, SB 1137, and it requires lenders to contact homeowners and explore the restructuring of the options of the loan. But the other two important things, it gives double the time for tenants to move out of foreclosed properties, and it requires the owners to maintain foreclosed properties.
Okay.
That's in the legislation. Now, I don't know how they're going to enforce that, but at least we seem to be moving in the right direction, but there's not enough can be done quick enough. I know your area is been devastated by this, and I think it's partnerships that's going to make a difference.
Well, ironically, as the market is correcting itself, I'm also hearing anecdotal stories of young families that are buying foreclosures. and
Well,
that
that's the other
they
thing.
could have never afforded. And the question is, are we seizing the opportunity for these people to buy them? Because the option, what will occur is wealthy people or people who have graduated from one economic situation to another will then buy those properties and rent them.
Right. Well, the other issue that we're trying to look at in terms of relocation is, and this is where the government subsidy programs can come into play, is that now that there's a group of low to moderate income families that have been traditionally priced out of the market, and now that the housing values have gone down, maybe this is where we're matching and with some REO properties at reduced rates, first-time homeowners, an opportunity to then put first-time homeowners into those foreclosed properties as opposed to investors. So again, we talk about the public health of a neighborhood and the public safety issues, and you'll have homeowners as opposed to renters, and instead of investors buying up the property, there's a whole slew of now people that will be able to afford. That's the silver lining. It's very thin silver lining, mind you, in terms of this foreclosure. But that's a commitment that we're also making and working with some of the banks with their REO properties to do so.
Thank you. I did want to ask you just a quick general statement about home ownership versus rental. And you heard me talk about the proportion. What are your thoughts on that?
Certainly, we have been committed over the last 24 years in building homeownership, particularly into the low to moderate income families. Homeownership is how you create wealth across generations in this country. And it saddens me to see, particularly the Latino population, my gente, who've been suffering at the enormous rates, lose their homes and their opportunity to educate their kids and send them to college. By the way, there is no student loan anymore. It's a parent student loan. So I found that out when my kids went to college. Yeah. So if you're foreclosed, and even if your kid, they get into UCLA or USC, they won't be able to get a student loan because their parent has to sign off. And what is the likelihood that that student loan is going to be available for a foreclosed family? Their credit's decimated. So homeownership has been the key to generational wealth, and it's been the key to, devastation, divorce. When there's, if you have a home and you get divorced, there's a lot, there's at least some options for you in terms of finances. Devastating illnesses, you lose a job, you have the equity. So So the home has been used to do so much, and I know that you'll have people talk about how it's subsidized, small business, et cetera, as well. So where possible, building the home ownership rate is really, our mission is right now to try and rebuild it after the devastation of this last 2 years.
Well, not only would we will continue to work with you to look for ideas and explore the feasibility for local, state, federal law to support, to push, and also to encourage banking institutions to work with organizations like yours to explore improvements. I also want to remind you of those anecdotes again. We really appreciate that, but I also I think you have an anecdote to tell about your own family experience and home ownership, and I would appreciate, if that's true, that you might want to write a nice story about what that meant for your family.
Okay.
Because I think it would be telling the story of millions, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Now, Erin Rank from the Habitat for Humanity.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for this opportunity. I really commend your effort to look at these issues related to poverty, especially how homeownership ties into poverty. And I want to thank the team for the well-written report. I do have some comments that I'll send in writing to you and submit. As we've talked about, the city is in the grip of an affordable housing crisis. The dynamics have changed in the past year, and I think that to underscore the comments that have already been made, there is a bit of urgency around our actions. We can't wait for the federal government to channel funds down for us to buy foreclosed properties. Now that the prices of land and properties are going down, we have an excellent opportunity to act. And I think it's time for us to look at our policies and the way we have been doing business and see how we can refine to be most nimble to get some more people into home ownership. Habitat for Humanity is of Greater Los Angeles, has been around, Habitat's been around for 30 years, and our goal is to eliminate poverty housing by building and renovating homes in partnership with low-income families. We operate in all 50 states in the United States and 90 countries around the world. And in the state of California, there are 54 Habitat affiliates. The Greater Los Angeles affiliate, which I lead, is the largest producing affiliate in California and is in the top 1% nationwide as far as Habitat affiliates and families served. Last year alone, we built and renovated 100 homes just in the city of Los Angeles. And worldwide, the organization has built more than 250,000 homes. So we are targeting families that are earning below 80% of median income. And we provide these homeowners or these families an opportunity at home ownership.
No,
by,
when you say 80% of median income,
right. It's roughly $60,000
nationally,
for a family of four.
in a community, or?
We base ours on the HUD statistics for Los Angeles.
So but are you targeting disadvantaged areas? What is the geography for the 80% of median income? I mean, every community has a different median income. So you're saying Los Angeles as a whole, the 80% of median income for that would be $60,000?
Roughly $60,000 for a family of four.
For a family of four, okay.
Right.
And that fits right into the numbers I was throwing out earlier. Okay.
Right. And we go down to 30%. So we go pretty low in providing homeownership opportunities where most people are not able to. And that's because we provide the interest-free mortgages to the families that participate in our program.
I want to sort of jump forward. I think most everybody
Sure.
knows about
Okay.
Habitat for Humanity, but one of the issues that Habitat for Humanity, and I should say I was a board member. I was a board member of a lot of organizations. Okay, so
Yes.
let's just get that on the
And I
record.
know that you're-
The Habitat was one of them, and in the San Fernando Valley. And one of the challenges we have is
Capacity.
the continuous flow of volunteer support, the continuous flow of donations. Of course, the city processing is an issue, but even assuming that, the consistency of the development process it's a challenge for Habitat,
Right.
because the bureaucracy is just not geared for a Habitat for Humanity. And so, and I'm not just speaking of the city government bureaucracy, I'm talking about the volunteer bureaucracy. It's just a whole different dynamic. Has that been your experience? Oh, and by the way, you, of course, require the sweat equity provision. The families have to
500
provide
hours.
sweat equity.
That's right.
I was thinking that since the vacancy rate is a problem, that we could probably pick up a bunch of houses at a very low discount rate,
Right.
and even use your nonprofit status to cut a deal with the banks.
We're doing that.
That might benefit their Community Reinvestment Act requirements, but you require sweat equity. So we couldn't really do that unless we put the sweat someplace else.
Well, they can rehabilitate those homes, and that's what we're doing. We're having them work on the rehabilitation of the homes because, like has been mentioned, many of the homes are damaged. And the properties that Habitat is most likely to obtain from the lenders are those that have been sitting on the market for a long period of time because they're in, rougher neighborhoods or people damaged them when they left, and people don't want to put in the
I have to ask this
cost to
question.
rehabilitate them.
And I'm a huge fan of Millard Fuller and the Habitat for Humanity organization, but it is not part and parcel of our economic system. It is sort of counterintuitive to the way our system is supposed to work. The way our system is supposed to work, people build houses, make good wages, and then they could buy their own house. And when we're doing it with volunteers, it sort of takes away an opportunity to create a good-paying job so somebody else could buy their own house at a normal under normal conditions, a traditional loan, if you will, if there's any more traditional loans out there. And so I have to say it. I don't know that Habitat for Humanity is the be-all and end-all to solve our problems in the housing area. But certainly, since we're not solving the problems in a lot of other ways, there's certainly a definite need for Habitat's activity.
I guess I would respond by saying, well, on the job front, Habitat for Humanity does employ local workers in the areas that we build. We certainly don't do all the work with volunteers, all the infrastructure, all the construction, the the electricity, the plumbing. Those things are done by skilled labor, and in those cases, we do use paid labor from the communities where we build. Additionally, we use our site as training sites for the apprenticeship unions and the community colleges, and they, instead of building on their campuses, they come and build Habitat for Humanity homes, so they're learning a trade on our sites. And so we feel that it's a great partnership that's advancing people's job worthiness and job readiness.
Yeah. Well, that's a great response. I thought you might say something like when communities used to do barn raising and volunteer to build somebody's barn, it was because they knew that family would be productive for the community and would produce products that were needed for the community and would self-sustain, so they wouldn't require charity. And if we could get back to that notion in our society where we recognize that our giving to somebody else is helping them to give to us when we're in need, that it would work. But your response was even better. So, but the bottom line is that you do understand the need to create a healthier workforce with healthier with wage opportunities that enable them to participate in the
Absolutely.
housing market on a natural, more traditional basis.
And on your scalability question, I would say that while we're not the only way of doing it, we certainly are a way of continuing to provide home ownership that will stabilize our communities. Over the past 5 years, I can't count how many people in policy meetings have told me we just can't do home ownership. And I'm saying we're doing it every day. So is it a matter of will? Is it a matter of how our policies have been structured? As you mentioned, is if we're putting $200,000 to $400,000 in a rental unit, Habitat's doing it with $90,000 from LAHD, and we're building houses repeatedly. Granted, not everybody wants to give a 0% loan, but what if we could go back to giving people 1%, 2%, 3% loans, 1% down programs, and credit them with some of their, if they're willing to invest time in building their house, then why not give them an opportunity at a lower interest, lower down payment loan? Maybe you don't have to do the sweat equity program, but certainly I think it's a matter of will and reallocating our resources to emphasize home ownership more.
One thing I would like to know from Habitat that is very specific to the city of Los Angeles, since
Right.
we do participate in supporting Habitat's programs, what can we do better? The fact of the matter is that there are still challenges to develop in the city, no matter who's doing it, and part of that challenge is to work to assist you to expedite your project so that you can get on to the next project. So if there's any information you can give, we would like to, well, first of all, we want to present your model, whether it's as a substantive part of the document or as an anecdotal
Right.
story to talk about how the sweat equity concept works and and how we need to reinvest in that. You probably don't know, but I was involved in the first Habitat project in Los Angeles, and I was the one that changed the policies at the housing department to enable them to do the transactions that with the city of Los Angeles to access some of the funds that were necessary to make Habitat for Humanity work in Los Angeles. And I'm doing a project right now, and I hope that we can make it happen. But so I want to thank you for your efforts. Please, we're going to need more information from Habitat specifically.
I do have some policy recommendations. The policies that you worked on for the first Habitat House are still the ones that we're operating under today. And I think that would be great to re-examine those. And just one of them to share would be that the way that LAHD and CRA have structured their soft seconds to programs like Habitat for Humanity is that they allow people to buy out of their affordability restriction. And I would say that if our goal is to increase the number of affordable homeownership units in Los Angeles, that we maintain those affordability restrictions for either 30 to 45 years, as has been set out, and don't let people buy out of them. Require that they can still build equity, but do sell that home then to another income qualified family if they leave before the restrictions expire. So I think that at this point, we're never going to get ahead of the game, because if someone buys a house now, that $90,000 subsidy, when they pay it off, we will need more money to get another affordable unit into our pool. So that's one policy I would look at.
We absolutely want to hear more recommendations from you and see how we can incorporate them and expedite the projects that you have. I know that I get calls from Jack Shine on a regular basis in the San Fernando Valley,
we're doing our best to support them in their growth. So I mean, it would be better if everybody was, able to put more units into the markets.
Absolutely. Well,
but thank you for your leadership, both with Habitat, with the city, with the state, and on this issue.
Thank you both. Your organizations, please extend our thanks to your organizational leaders for their leadership and for their focus on issues of poverty. For me, we're doing the report for you. You've been doing this for years as a part of your mission statement, and so we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, I'm going to try and move a little quicker.
Any cards?
No cards. Unless you didn't give them to me. Okay, our next speaker is, this is on the asset building process and access to financial services. I think the myth is that just because somebody's in the workforce, they're well equipped with a basic knowledge of asset building as a concept and access to mainstream financial services. When I was a kid, owning a home someday was the common American dream. I've literally traveled around the state of California asking people what is their American dream, and more people are not saying that owning a home is a primary American dream to them. They may say education for their kids, or usually what they say is getting a good job. But the notion that they own a home is not necessarily focused on, and that's all about asset building. So I want to ask Alan Fisher from the California Reinvestment Coalition to talk about fair and equal access to financial services. Sunena Chatri, Asset Policy Initiative of California, to talk about the difference between poverty and asset poverty and the importance of building assets. And Fred Smith from Operation Hope, who will discuss financial literacy leading to economic empowerment. I've already sort of spilled the beans generally on the notions that you are going to explore, but you are the experts, and we really rely on your information and appreciate you stepping forward. We hope to incorporate healthy doses of your information into this document to give people a better understanding. What are we talking about when we're talking about asset building and financial literacy? What the heck is all that stuff? Alan Fisher?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I think this is certainly a worthy goal, and I don't know how someone could have a goal that was less than ending poverty. What would it be? Let's have less poverty. And I think that it's, both your work in the state legislature and here, these are really critical questions that are often not raised. The California Reinvestment Coalition, where I work, is a coalition of more than 250 groups in California that work to get banks to offer more access. And we've also tried to get insurance companies to offer more and to stop payday lending, tax refund loans. And I think you're looking at your myth. I think that it really is a myth that people don't really understand. People don't understand what's going on in the financial world. More of what we do is about asset preservation, keeping people from losing money from high-cost services. But the access to mainstream financial services, as you say in your report, something like a quarter of the people are unbanked. And some of that is because bank locations are not in the area where low-income people are. What's there are payday lenders and pawn shops and check cashers. And it's also that the way that banks often are is very confusing. People go in and really don't understand what happens if they bounce a check or if they bounce more than one. It's maybe $30, $35 for that. So you can get trapped in that way into problems. There's something called check systems. If you get in trouble on your account that you can go into, there are 10 million people in check systems, and that's one of the barriers to people being in banking. It's a database of people who have basically had their accounts closed.
Oh.
It could be someone who didn't realize if they went under $100, they had a $10 or $15 a month fee, and then came back and looked at their savings account and they were negative $30.
Wow.
And so they got upset and they walked away. And the bank said, well, if you won't give us your money, we'll put you in this database. So many people just out of not understanding or out of being treated in a way.
I didn't know that one.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I think how many of us read the things that come with our credit cards about how it's really going to work?
Obviously, not everybody in the room.
Yeah. So I think all of those things are things that are real impediments for people in terms of understanding. And that it's both financial literacy, which we've talked about some, but it's also the structure that you've talked about. Because, everybody doesn't understand everything. The way things are written, things that are called disclosures often only disclose for attorneys who really understand it all.
Let me challenge you a little bit here. What about the whole notion of caveat emptor? And why are we caring so much about all these people who don't take the time to understand or don't know, and yet get involved in the thing and get into a financial mess? Does caveat emptor mean anything anymore?
Well, I think we can certainly look at the housing crisis and see that caveat emptor means a lot, that there was no real protection for those folks and they're in big trouble. I think there's a responsibility of government, of the public sector, to watch out for people and to have a reasonable amount of oversight so that they're not trapped. And so
Well, maybe one of the myths is caveat emptor doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, right.
Or maybe that's not a myth.
Yeah, or that caveat emptor is all that we have and regulation is
Or
not.
caveat emptor is the basis for our system, and maybe it just doesn't work.
Right, and I think it doesn't because people, Esther was talking about the mortgage crisis and you were talking about it. Sometimes it was a nephew of someone in their neighborhood, sometimes it was a fellow church member, often the people that you would trust, and they're very confusing transactions. So, I think that the public sector has a responsibility.
I think, did we incorporate the language about the translator children? We're trying to get into these myths, and one of the issues of in our immigrant society that's a reality is that many of the deals that are the contractual obligations that are transacted by virtue of a child interpreting for their parent what is in the document. When they may read at a third grade level, or even if they read at an eighth grade level, but the document's printed at a master's degree level, and they're translating that for their parents. I can only imagine the kind of stress that would put on a child, but over time, and I know many people who've had that situation. I tried to get a law passed in Sacramento, and the chairman of the committee, who was a translator child, could not fend off the lobby and kill the bill. And I was really saddened by that. But it paints the daunting picture that we have. why would we not want a society that is financially literate?
Right. Why would we not want a society where people have to explain or the documents are clear enough so you can
Unless
understand?
we wanted to take food from the blind guy.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's just almost evil. Anyway, we look to your leadership, your guidance on really what kinds of actions can we take. Obviously, I start with the city of Los Angeles because that's my personal responsibility. But obviously, this is an issue in our school system. It's an issue in the legislature in terms of the definitions for contractual obligations. Buying a car, buying a house, what kinds of things can we do to improve those transactions? And we want to lay it out there, even if it may take some time for the political will to catch up.
I think that's great.
So we really appreciate your honest opinion on that.
I mean, I think I think that the things that you have in your report are very good. I think that one of the things that we've been looking at is payday lending in terms of this. And there are 165 payday lending outlets in the city of Los Angeles, which is a little less than half the number of bank branches. And my memory is that there are $388 million in fine or fees paid every year. That would mean just on average that something like $26.5 million comes out of the pockets of poor people in the city of Los Angeles to payday lenders. Mm-hmm. So what a difference that would make in terms of asset building if people were not paying that. I think that we're also concerned, I mean, the FDIC has a small dollar loan pilot where they're trying to get banks to do that and compete with the payday lenders. I don't think there's any bank in Los Angeles, but that could be something that the city council could encourage.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that one.
So the FDIC has a pilot where they're asking banks to do small dollar loans, maybe a 6-month consumer loan, so that someone who gets a payday loan instead could go to a bank.
Yeah, I think one of the things that needs to be said is that many of the banking transactions are driven by federal law in terms of how those transactions can transpire. And so the banks always raise their hand and say, well, we're sorry, but Congress says we can't do that. And it's sort of this vicious cycle. But one of the areas that we need to change is some of the federal banking law.
Right.
And the mortgage crisis is a great example of that.
No, I agree very much.
I actually believe that next, about February, will be a great opportunity for us to re-engage this country in new thinking on mortgage lending practices and banking in general. So we might want to get those recommendations out as quickly as possible.
And I think it's great that Mr. Obama has been supportive to this. But the city has a lot of money. This is a very large metropolis. There's a lot of business that the city does with financial institutions, with insurance companies. There are ways to use that. The city actually has a linked bank ordinance. I think it's
A what?
Linked bank ordinance, where it was linking its deposits and its activity with financial institutions with their community investments, their lending in communities, their branches, all of those things.
So we have certain standards that they have to meet to be involved in our money.
Well, it was almost completed and not completed, and the city attorney sort of put it in the drawer, but it's there. That you could
I would
use.
be very interested in exploring that. I was not aware of that, but I think I can tell you the power of our investments, the power of our pension fund, for example, is I'm very well aware of because I introduced the motion to divest from Switzerland during the Swiss bank's involvement in the
Holding Jewish families.
holdings of
funds,
Jewish families
yeah.
during World War II.
Right.
And within 3 weeks of that motion, the Swiss ambassador met with me personally, and in 3 weeks they changed that policy. So I can tell you that the city of Los Angeles, when, often people will say, well, why are we getting involved in international scheming? Well, we have a responsibility, and I think when we can impact it by using our dollars. I don't believe the taxpayers of Los Angeles wanted to contribute to that, and that's why I stepped forward. And I don't think we want to contribute to companies that are taking advantage of unscrupulous transactions, particularly like the mortgage crisis, which everybody's well aware of. So I really would like your advice on
Great.
that, and we definitely will incorporate that language into this document. And please let us know how we can expand the document.
Okay. There are zoning ordinances that you could do around check cashers, around payday lenders, so that there are other things to do that may not end it, but that stop it, that has safety applications. So I think there are a number of ways that you can use the power of the city.
Yeah, and I've often said this, and I may disagree with you on this. The check cashers and what did you call them? The payday lenders. They're not necessarily the bad guys. The more fundamental problem is that there's no access to the lower interest banking institutions, and so they're sort of a fail-safe. And some of them, as in any industry, banks, as we well know right now, have also been engaged in unscrupulous practices, and so we have to monitor that. But more than that, we have to create the opportunities for the lower interest rates to go to those people who do not have access to them right now.
Well, and I think we actually worked with other groups in the state legislature last year to try and get a law passed to limit payday lending in terms of its interest rates, because obviously there's a need. But I think the question is it okay to do 459% interest? Is it okay to pay, what did I figure, $450 to get $255, because people do it repetitively.
I don't think people really, when I was, I remember when the law was, when I was in the legislature and the law was being contemplated, I don't think it was the one you're speaking of, but the one before it. And I was calculating the interest, and the reason they escape it is because they're short-term loans. But when you multiply it over an annual period, it's just a phenomenal interest. It's like 300%.
No, it's 459, and
459%.
Department of Corporations did a recent study that that the average is people using it 10 times in a year.
Yeah.
So it's not one time. It's not an appropriate product, I guess, is our position.
Well.
And other cities are passing ordinances, Oakland, Oceanside, Long Beach, to limit this. So it is something.
Well, we would like to incorporate this as part of the financial literacy package at every level, but also a corporate responsibility a response, because we also think corporations invest in some of these same companies that have some of these unscrupulous practices, and we also need to make our small business community aware of this. We know that labor unions have humongous pension funds that invest in some of these same organizations, and we want to encourage them not to do so. And so there's many different levels that we can address here, and we'd appreciate your guidance on that.
Yeah, all of the businesses the city does business with could be talked to about the kind of things that they invest in and what they do. I mean, there may be no other city except New York or Chicago in the country that would have the kind of clout and could make the difference that the city could.
One thing I'd like to say is this document is not going to be a thing where we got to do all these things immediately. I don't want people to be running for cover. But the notions will be presented and said, if we can do these things, it would impact poverty in this way, and so to the extent that we get them done, it's a good thing. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be able to do all of them or even set an annual goal to get them all done. But having them around will enable us to focus our energies, I think, a little better than they are right now. So.
Well, and I think every little bit of difference that you make makes a difference for the residents of the city.
Well, I hope that other people, I hope that we become translators of this information so that others will be able to have better transactions.
The one other thing I was going to say is I was glad to see insurance companies in here as well, because they really have done little, especially compared to how much they take out of the community in terms of the policies. So I think that's another great target where they could do a tremendous amount more. Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you. Sanaya Chantry?
Yes, thank you Thank you for this opportunity to testify here, and thank you for your leadership on this very important issue. I work at EARN, a San Francisco-based nonprofit, and we work on 2 levels to advance asset building, as practitioners and as policy advocates. In the Bay Area, we provide individual development accounts and other match savings products that enable families to save for home ownership, post-secondary education, and small businesses. And one of the first things I would like to address is myths about poverty in the asset building field. One of the most common arguments we hear is that poor people cannot save. And we have a wealth of data and research and information and anecdotal evidence that shows that when given appropriate savings incentives and products, people can and do save. Just as a testament to that, our EARN clients earn an average of $22,000 a year, and they manage to save 5% of their income each month. And to date, EARN savers have saved $2.2 million, despite living in one of the most expensive regions in the country. And with IDA providers in LA, Silicon Valley, and San Francisco, they've saved over $4 million. So asset building is a possibility, and people can save and build wealth, even if they are
Now, tell us
not
why that
earning very
savings
much.
is so important in your estimation.
Sorry, repeat that again?
Tell us why that ability to save is so critical.
Okay, well, we have plenty of research and data that shows that if your parents are homeowners, if they have college education, you're more likely to become a homeowner. You're more likely to have a college education. You're more likely to be healthier, happier, more civically engaged. So asset building saving towards and building assets is ultimately the goal if you want to eliminate poverty and not just address the symptoms of them.
So it's not just the first generation that's affected, it's the second generation.
Right.
What does that say for Los Angeles with 31% home ownership?
Yes, the city of Los Angeles has a lot of work to do. Just specifically on asset poverty in Los Angeles, almost half of all residents in the city live in asset poverty, and this is even more magnified when you look at...
Describe asset poverty.
So asset poverty means that these families are not able to weather financial distresses. So if there's an interruption in income, they will not be, So this means these families do not have enough savings to live at the federal poverty line for 3 months if their income is disrupted. So if there's a medical emergency or they lose their job, they're 3 months away from being dependent on public assistance, losing housing, or worse.
3 months is actually longer than I would have expected. Most people have said that the majority of people, at least in California, are 1, 2, or 3 paychecks away from poverty.
Right.
So,
I mean, this is at the federal poverty line, so this is, living on $350 a week. So it's not very much.
yeah. So the notion of asset building, when you're talking about savings, is really it's not just about having cash savings, but having the ability to take those savings and build those savings into an investment that will generate more income, like owning a home.
Right,
In
exactly.
fact, most of the people that are well established, I've seen many stories of first-generation immigrants who have become successful not because of their job, but because of their real estate transactions. They make more money in transacting real estate than they do in their job. And in fact, when the housing market was at 20% a year increase, many people were making more in 1 year on their house than they were at their jobs, and they lost equally as much or more when the market took a dive. So that's one of the issues of the housing crisis. Well, we, again, one thing I want to remind you, anecdotal information would be very helpful because, again, I want to paint a picture, a human picture. So if you have individuals that you could recommend that they can present the story of how asset building helped them, or what they've done right, or those that have had problems because they were not able to.
Right.
In the same circumstances, a comparison sort of two people, those that were able to save and those who weren't, and that would be a nice anecdote.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. In fact, every year we give Asset Builder of the Year award, and we give 4 of them each year, and these are for clients who save for home ownership, for small business, post-secondary education, whatnot. So each year we have our clients that provide their life story and how they were able to save and build assets.
Yeah. I've heard stories that the Japanese average savings per family is 17% of their income, and in California it's less than 5%.
Yes.
Is that?
I know national data, which hovers around 0 to negative, so, yeah.
Negative? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fred Smith, Operation Home.
Thank you, and let me again thank you for having the insight and focus to establish this committee and attack this very important issue. It's my pleasure to be here, certainly, and to represent Operation Hope and our founder, John Bryant, who really talks about 2 things: a mission of Operation Hope to eliminate poverty as we know it, and/or to fix the Jericho Road. You have a copy of my comments, so I'm going to skip through a number of this in the interest of time and go down to what I believe are being some key issues. Certainly, we have experience in eliminating poverty through financial literacy, which we've been doing for the last 16 years. One of the biggest myths or misconceptions in America and in Los Angeles County is that poverty is a result of low-skilled immigration and individuals who want a government handout. Our experience over the last 16 years indicates that poverty is a result of unwise decisions and low expectations based on inaccurate information and advice from communities, members, and family members. Examples: if you don't have a B+ GPA, you can't go to college. Hear it constantly in various communities. That's a good paying job. Why are you wasting your time going to school?
Okay, thank you.
You need 2 credit cards and use them to establish credit. Prices are increasing more than 6% a year. Why are you saving at 1.5%? Insurance coverage is for the bank. If they don't require it, you don't need it. The only way you're going to get rich is to win the lottery. You won't play. You can't win if you won't play. Now, these are just a few of the things that really lead people into
That may
poverty.
be the opiate of the masses.
Pardon?
The lottery.
The lottery. I mean, the mentality of poverty. Poverty is 2 things. We have found low expectations and people who are doing what they know how to do and what they're told to do. And they make poor decisions based on that information. The working poor and unemployed in Los Angeles are not dumb, stupid, lazy. They are uninformed or misinformed. We find that through financial literacy, when they know better, financially, they tend to do better. They make informed decisions, choose the appropriate financial services, purchase quality goods and services, save, become homeowners, small business owners, stakeholders who attend community school meetings, community meetings, vote, and frankly, pay more taxes based on increased income and assets. We have developed a number of programs to do financial literacy. We think financial literacy really is the key. Financial literacy in the city of Los Angeles, examples. Financial literacy for city employees. We have city employees that call us every single day on mortgage crisis issues. They've made poor decisions. Financial literacy for occupants of city-subsidized housing. Asking contractors with the city, well, do you have a program for financial literacy for your low-wage workers? Ask the question on RFP. These are all things that can be done to encourage financial literacy and break the back of poverty. Talked earlier about the issue of whether, in fact, it should just be let the buyer beware. Certainly, more than that is needed, simply because today, my poor decisions, if I'm living on your block, affects the property, the value of your property, and hence, you need to make sure and do everything you can that I make wise decisions.
Well,
So that's one of those issues that clearly poor decisions and uninformed decisions affect us all.
Yeah, I don't know that I would be as harsh on the personal responsibility side, recognizing that there are predatory practices and people who prey on people. I also think that that one of the things that happens is you rely on certain people, you rely on certain organizations, and you get a consultant to advise you. There were many talented experts who were advising people to buy a home at all costs.
Absolutely.
In the last 2 years. And I don't know whether you can call that a personal bad decision or just the fact that they relied on somebody who should have advised them differently, and whose responsibility is that. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter. As a society, if we upgrade people's knowledge, personal knowledge about how to, on all of these financial transactions, we should gain a much more informed society that doesn't allow for predatory practices on the natural. So we definitely want the information about the kinds of things, but in particular, one of the things that will be incorporated into this packet is the whole notion of legislation to require that the public educational system include financial literacy. The question is, what should be included in that financial literacy program? What should be required? And having been a legislator and knowing that the teachers' lobby is going to come out and say, wait a minute, what are you going to take away from? We need to know where it's incorporated. Is it going to be incorporated into math? Is it going to be incorporated into social studies? Is it going to be incorporated, where in, because if we try to expand the hours of the day, it ain't going to happen. So we want a pragmatic recommendation of what are the specific financial literacy responsibilities that an average person should have upon receiving their diploma from high school in their satchel of intellectual ability.
Well, we certainly can provide you that. We have a Banking on Our Future program that's outlined in the book.
I'm not trying to put you out of business, by the way, but
No.
it's going to take us a long time.
We always like to say there's enough property to go around. There's no way that we can handle it all, and certainly we need everybody's hands on this issue that's necessary.
We would love for the three of you to help us craft a package of educational requirements that could be incorporated into our public educational system.
Yes, but my comment is starting with our Banking on Our Future program that's already in schools. We're in 51 cities throughout the United States. It's already been accepted by New York school system, et cetera. Various school system has all of the standards. At least it's a good start.
Yeah,
And it meets
I
all.
don't think this stuff is too complicated.
It's not.
It seems complicated when you try to do some of the technical stuff, but I think it's not that complicated when you break it down in terms of the practical transaction that is going on.
It's checking,
So
savings, interest rates.
we
how
want
they
to thank
affect
you for the work you do and appreciate your input so that we can craft a really good recommendation relative to financial literacy in the public educational system.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to move forward. I'm sorry. We do have a public comment card on item number 3, which is this panel. Hamid Khan from the South Asian Network.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Hamid Khan with South Asian Network, primarily working with communities from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, India, Pakistan. I wanted to comment about the issues of poverty in our community, but as we were talking about asset building, I do want to highlight that how people get ripped off of their assets, what kind of fraud is going on out there in the communities. As a grassroots organization, we see the experiences of our communities through numerous lenses and how poverty affects their lives, whether it turns into domestic violence, whether it turns into drug abuse, whether it turns into trafficking, whether it turns into individuals forced into economic and sexual servitude. Poverty just doesn't happen, it is created. There's an intent behind poverty. There's an intent. There are structures that support that intent. There are systems of knowledge that validate that intent. And there is, unfortunately, political protection that is granted to this intent as well. I just want to use a quick example of two areas that how our communities are being affected. One, we started organizing taxi drivers about 4 years ago in the city of Los Angeles. And what we found was a system of sharecropping. In September 2006, UCLA professors Gary Blasey and Jackie Levitt came out with a study, and the title of the study was Driving Poor. And what they found was, and this is where it comes down to, and I really appreciate Councilmember because I've always kind of followed your track around ending poverty, but I think in this particular instance, it is clearly where the city has failed. Because as a public utility, where the franchises are given, what they found was that this is a system that has been created for self-dealing and monopoly under the nose of the city without any investigation that has taken place. So while we are talking about poverty, while we are talking about a lot of other aspects of poverty, there are actions that the city can take to really challenge these systems and to end the system of poverty as well. And the other, quickly, I'll just talk about is this issue of we've been working with the beauty salon workers. And that goes all across the board as well, that how, and for us it's really interesting, these are two very gendered organizing campaigns where these employment contracts that are created where non-compete clauses are in those contracts which are unenforceable in the state of California, that goes to the literacy issue as well. So it's not just that, that people, they want to build their assets, but unfortunately the way the structure is created, that it creates a lot of hardships, and particularly about the taxi drivers, we're really looking for your leadership to address some of those issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we're more than happy to share our story.
Thank you. Yeah, please do, please do. We're going to move on to the final panel, and that is related to small businesses. We have Cook Sunu from the Asia Pacific Islanders Small Business Program, 4C Hogan Rolls from the Community Financial Resource Center, Roberto Barragan from the Valley Economic Development Center, oh, there's Roberto, and Alberto Alvarado from the Small Business Administration. My father was a small businessman for 45 years, and a real small business, a micro enterprise, if you will, and that was one of the reasons I crafted the micro enterprise legislation for the state of California for the first time, put a definition on micro enterprise in the state of California. In fact, the sponsoring entity of the bill was the Valley Economic Development Center and Roberto Barragan. But I think most people think that once you become a business owner, you're a success, and they just don't know how many businesses have failed. And we definitely have to increase those opportunities, particularly in Los Angeles, where the vast majority of businesses that are being created are created by, as I said earlier, the first generation immigrants, women who are typically first generation immigrants, and are very small businesses that fail. But we also know that with guidance they succeed. So this is a major segment of our economy. Typically, those small businesses are paying minimum wages and perhaps in a way contributing to other people's inability to be self-sustaining. So their success would also extend to their employees. If they succeed, they'll hopefully be able to pay better wages and keep their employees off of minimum wage lifestyle. So with that, that's the notion that we want to capture, generally speaking, for our report. And we'd like to ask first Cook Sunu to tell us about helping small businesses overcome barriers, link between mainstream economy and ethnic small businesses in particular.
Thank you very much for convening this group this afternoon. Thank you for dedicating the time to this very important issue. And thank you on behalf of all of us, I think, for recognizing that small and micro businesses are a key piece of a key ingredient towards attacking the problems of poverty. I want to make two basic points, if I may, this afternoon. And one has to do with destroying the myth of the success of Asian businesses across the board. And the second is dealing with the potential that micro businesses have for people in poverty. First of all, with regards to Asian businesses and the model minority myth of Asians, connecting it to the current environment of small businesses, the Asian population, in fact, has had a significant growth of small businesses. We grew in 24% as compared to a growth of 10% of businesses across the board, which is pretty exciting in terms of numbers. The API receipts, however, grew by a percentage of 13%, in a time of 12% inflation, keeping 1% above inflation, whereas businesses across the board were growing at a percentage rate of 22%. And this is with information from the U.S. Economic Census, most recent edition. 80% of API entrepreneurs are immigrants, and they do face hurdles of language and culture, and it is programs that are particularly geared towards them in their own languages where they can achieve a higher level of success. You had talked earlier about the fact that 90% of businesses fail in their first year. We know that with assistance that we can triple the success rate. We know that with the businesses that we help, probably all of us across the table here help, we can make businesses successful. Let me just lay that on the table and talk more importantly about the broader contexts of micro businesses. The role that micro businesses can play as a road out of poverty cannot be ignored, should not be underestimated. The API Small Business Program and others like us in Los Angeles assist tens of thousands of entrepreneurs annually. Most programs are federally funded and combine individual counseling and group training. In the minority immigrant populations, there exists barriers to full salaried employment opportunities. So in the immigrant community, you're right in observing that there's a high level of entrepreneurship. A lot of those entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs of somewhat last resort. Our immigrant populations didn't come to the United States necessarily with the idea of opening a business, but those immigrant populations face the discrimination, racial and xenophobia that prevent them from, and in a number of instances, having the job skills that are marketable and therefore turn to entrepreneurship as a way to survive. Let me just...
If I could interrupt
Sure.
you just for a second, and this question actually is for each of you. You've heard me talk about anecdotes. I'm assuming that you have clients that you could point to that have that validate what you've just said, because I really believe that we need to present those human stories really sell this notion that we can end poverty. But do you have clients that fit in that category of people who have been forced into business as opposed to wanting to do it initially?
Sure, across the board. And I think that the idea that
if we could get an anecdotal story about a real person who was forced into business that sort of reflected a common experience in the business experience you just described.
Sure, because of language, because of xenophobic barriers that exist.
Exactly. That would be very helpful. And I think it, as I said, it will paint it. While some people will read the academic document and go to sleep, starting with me, on the other hand, they will read the story about the human person that experienced something, and that will paint a picture that is more likely to cause a reaction.
Sure. I mean,
Hopefully to inspire them to do something to end poverty.
The number of stories of folks that have had salaried jobs in countries of their origin coming here.
Oh, that would be great.
Not being able to find employment, ultimately opening a marginal business.
And yeah, of course, we also would like to know what are those marginal businesses. And, I see them all the time at Pacoima, to tell you the truth, but we'd like that information from you.
I know that in '92, during the riots and the civil disturbances, that the Korean businesses across the board were the heaviest hit ethnically in the city, and kind of the second ripple effect of this was that you could see that kids had to come home from college because of the marginal nature of the business, because tuition couldn't be paid, room and board away from home couldn't be paid. You could see that the vacancy rate in the Koreatown area, where there were a lot of Koreans in apartments, they couldn't make their next month's rent. And the vacancy rates escalated significantly. There were a number of building owners then that started losing their apartment buildings. And it really laid out it made it pretty naked, the fact that so many of the businesses across the board were just extremely marginal.
There's somewhat of a myth also that once you're in business, you're rich.
Oh, that's exactly true.
Most of the businesses that you're speaking of are probably making less than what somebody doing similar work is doing in some other field.
And Councilman, they're working.
In fact, I use my dad as the example. In all the years he was in business, I think he made about the same as the upholsterers who work for him.
And I was going to say they're working 18 hours a day to keep from getting a job. People don't recognize
there's certain
the
benefits
effort
that come. My dad used
involved.
to talk about how he could drop everything and pick us up from school and enjoy our sports activities or whatever and have this certain independence. At the same time, yeah, he was working Saturdays and Sundays. And
Sure, we have clients who have operated small businesses for the last 10 years, 15 years, and have never taken a day off. The one businessman I'm thinking about in particular was really happy when winter comes because he closes his store 2 hours earlier. And it's a little corner grocery store. And he says, it gets dark and people don't come out, so he closes 2 hours earlier in the winter. So he sees seasonally that winter is his time of his light period, and that's when he gets what we would take a week's vacation. He takes 2 hours a day off the winter. And sees it as a luxury. Let me finish quickly, and I know that we all have similar things to say, but in terms of what a micro business can do, let me give you two very quick examples. One would be a home-based childcare, and the other would be an auto detailing operation. A home-based childcare, in order to be a home-based childcare, you should really have a license to do it legally. Once you get that license, which is a little bit complicated to get, but once you get that license, you can have up to 6 children in your apartment that you care for on a daily basis. And at the low end, you can charge $650 per child per month. And if you have 6 kids, a single person can earn $46,000 a year. Now, you have to subtract expenses out of that, but the expenses are fairly minimal. An auto detailer can earn $100, $125 per car that he or she details. And if that entrepreneur details 2 cars per day, works 5 days a week, and takes 3 weeks off, and if there's a seasonal drop for a third of the year of 50% of his business, he can still have a gross revenue of $50,000 a year. And this is where a lot of the car detailers that do this don't have a shop to operate out of. They do it on the phone, they go to the place of business, they go to somebody's house and detail their cars. So, but you can't just get that, if you're an auto detailer, you can't just get that 100, 150 clients per year without thinking about it, without planning it, without being able to have some market sense. If you're the home-based childcare provider, it's very difficult to go out on your own and think, oh, I think I'll just go out and get a license. And that's where organizations such as ours become critically important. It means that we can help these people, guide them through those processes. We just last week, for one of our home-based child care provider that we started 2.5 years ago, she just switched over to what's called a center-based child care. So she owns, today she does own a facility where she has a child care center. And last week we closed a 1.2 SBA guaranteed loan for her on that facility. And she started as a home-based child care facility, making perhaps $46,000 a year 2.5 years ago.
I think the bottom line of all of your testimony is that we can change the success rate for small businesses and micro businesses in particular with simple information, with a very low investment of time and resources. We can greatly enhance the opportunities for success. I've often said that managing a business, most people sort of get in, my dad, using my dad as an example, they get into a business because they have a particular skill. And in today's world, when my dad started, it was much less complicated. In today's world, you have to know about workers' compensation, insurance. It's not enough just to know you buy workers' compensation insurance. You got to know about workers' comp, or you could get into a big jam. You have to know safety regulations. You have to know payroll, personnel procedures, anti-discrimination issues, handicap issues. And there's so much information that business owners have to have. And to walk into business without that information and sort of learn it as you go, it's a very costly experience. To know that beforehand, you're saving a lot of money, and money that could be reinvested into the business. So I want you all to know that those concepts will be incorporated into this document. I've seen them work. I've seen them work with your agencies, and I applaud you for that. So the question is, what kinds of things can we do to enhance opportunities for people to gain this information? And also, you heard me talking about financial literacy. What can we do, recognizing that a huge chunk of the population is already out of high school, and that even if we got this public education process, there's millions of people who are going to need information that aren't going to be affected by that. So what kinds of things, what alternatives do we have? What kind of training mechanisms can we have for financial literacy, not necessarily just for the business community, but for others that you might recognize as problems that your clients have had because they weren't financially literate, but nevertheless they're in business. Yeah. And they run into all kinds of problems. Were you finished, Mr. Stewart?
Certainly. I just one comment in response to that is that I think the three of us as nonprofit business assistance organizations, I think we all teach a significant amount of entrepreneurial skills, which clearly includes money management and credit management. And I know that our clients today are managing their credit much more responsibly in this very dire time of credit crises. So
I thought I turned it off. I apologize. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay. For us? Sure.
Ready?
Yes.
All
Oh, I'm
right.
sorry. Forrest C. Hogan Rose from the Community Financial Resource Center.
Right. Thank you very much. I appreciate being here, and I had quite a few comments, but I will type them up and email you the bulk. I have a rule to not repeat what's already been said. That way I don't echo and repeat, and we're here for another 2 hours. So, but a couple of things I do need to do. Councilmember Gruhl left a little early, but I want to acknowledge that about 20 years ago, I sat in an office with her, and we talked about microenterprise development and how we could bring it to Los Angeles and what would it look like, and I wanted to just acknowledge that we did that. I also would like to take credit for Irene Fung. She is one of our prize former workers, employees at Community Financial Resource Center for about 5 years, and when she was deciding whether or not to go to graduate school here in LA or off to New York, we absolutely said, you got to stay in LA. What are you going to do? You can't go to New York and go to NYU. So we're pleased that she made the decision to go to USC, and we like to take credit for her whenever we can, because she did a great job at CFRC, and we know that your committee's in good hands. Absolutely. So with that, a couple of things. As you were talking, I know you were talking about the anecdotes, so I'm going to deviate from my comments just a little, because I'm going to email them in, and like I say, a lot of what's been said is part of my 8-page comment. But one thing is that I am great-granddaughter of slaves and a great-granddaughter of farmers, entrepreneurs. And my grandparents, even during the Depression, they were some of the few African-American farmers that actually owned their land, which I still own today. And I think that's important, because I think that's where I get my work ethic from. As a result of that, my own father and my mother was an entrepreneur working in real estate, but my dad was a city worker, and so worked for the Department of Water and Power for 43 years, where I'm now a commissioner. And when you look at how our families moved from poverty and into what I would say now is a strong middle class, middle income family, it was because there were programs that allowed that, my father was one of the early integration folks. He was one of the first blacks hired into a segregated department back in 1953. In addition, he had his own business with his brothers running a gas station on Figueroa and Century for about 25 years. So, he sort of income patched even then. And then my own mother, in her real estate, that's how she made extra money to help us get on the trips and save money for them to do more. So I think entrepreneurship is a part of who we are, particularly as people of color, and particularly as of people who have moved to cities to find a better way of life. Both my parents left, my mother left Missouri and my father left Florida to come to California, where they sought a better life. And I think most people that have arrived here of color who were trying to identify a way to do that certainly incorporated entrepreneurship. I, too, was an entrepreneur. I ran my own clothing business, had a small factory over on 8th and Los Angeles Street in the early 80s, and when I didn't become a millionaire in the 5th year, I sold it and went on to teach, and then eventually came into this business where I'm told I'm a social entrepreneur, and that I just got the award from Loyola Marymount in April of this year for social entrepreneurship, and when they introduced me, and LMU is my alma mater, undergrad, they said, she's a social entrepreneur and she didn't care about the money. And I was like, oh, quite the contrary. We really care about the money. because without the money, if we don't raise the money, we can't then deliver it to our customers who need small business lending programs and revolving loan funds, and we need to be able to pay our staff, and otherwise we can't deliver our services. So I needed to correct the professor on that one. But I say that to say microenterprise is a critical component of what I want to call poverty elimination. I totally agree with you earlier in your comments when you were saying we can't end poverty, and you talked about the programs that Sergeant Shriver did and some of the early programs. And you know, there's no reason why in Los Angeles we can't be a city that leads the nation in eliminating poverty, because we have the wherewithal right here in our city. So I want to sort of jump to, without really honing in on too much, because I think each of us, and we all work together too. You know, we've all done small business lending together. We all are reaching low-income populations. That's who we focus on. And I'm sorry?
You fought the wars together.
Yeah, we're still in the battle trenches together. So, you know, these are my comrades here. But most importantly, there are some ways that I continuously think about what are some ways that we as Angelenos can in fact impact scale. And what is scale? What does that really mean? I mean, you know, we're serving our 15th year at Community Financial Resource Center. And, you know, we boast that we've served over, 90,000 people, and we've created over 1,000 jobs, and the economic impact, if you use the HUD guidelines of $35,000 a job, comes to about $32 million. But when you look at the greater city of Los Angeles and recognize that probably 1 million people are functioning at the low income level or below, and at least 700,000, even according to your staff report, is at poverty level, then that's really a drop in the bucket. If each one of us served, created 1,000 jobs, that's still only 3,000. So what do we do? What is scale? What does that really mean? And so I just completed the Harvard program in February. It was through the Kennedy School, an adult program focused on, it's called Achieving Excellence in Community Development. And it's an 18-month program through their adult school at the Kennedy School. And their challenge to us, and there were 50 people from around the country that were selected to be in this program, to figure out how to take your community development organization to the next level. So they challenged us to look at what was scale. So, one of the things that resonated with me was, we're not doing enough. We're not even asking for enough money. I mean, to have a revolving loan fund that's maybe $7 million, that's nothing compared to what we really need to do in order to reach, say, 10,000 people in small business loans, or 25,000 people. So when I really started to look at it, our funds need to be more like 50 million to 100 million in small business revolving loan funds. And to do that, the banks are not going to invest that, even though they get CRA credit. Financial services organizations are not going to. So I sort of got entrepreneurial, and I thought that Los Angeles should be a little bit entrepreneurial. And I just felt like, because you took the leadership and the courage to even call this committee, that I just throw this out here, and I think it's something we should really look at. CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, works in the banking world because they're required. Now, you've got a host of bankers that would say, oh, no, we know it's good business. We know that it would work anyway. We would still do it even if we weren't required. Well, I don't know about that. So, I'm going to continue to advocate that they're required. Now, if you look at...
I would argue that they're legally prohibited.
Prohibited
from engaging in some of the CRA activities without the act.
Exactly.
Because their primary obligation is to their investor. And many of the activities, you could not make that argument that it is in the best interest of the investor.
Exactly. Exactly.
So no, they have to be required in order to be able to act.
Completely
agree.
agree.
I'd like to think that they didn't have that inhibition, but I think they say that so that you don't do the CRA.
Right, exactly. So we'll back off. Well, there's an example, and I'm sure you know about this, the COIN program, the California Organized Insurance Network. It was designed as sort of the compromise for insurance companies so that they wouldn't have a California CRA. Well, if you look at who uses those tax credits, the insurance companies largely don't. The banks understand the tax credits, so they access the credits much more often than insurance companies do. So I thought, what about a LA CRA, where we require, insurance companies, because we're required to have insurance as LA citizens. I mean, we have to have car insurance, we have to have house insurance. Some people have earthquake insurance. but we are required to have insurance, or we can get fined or whatever, right? So I thought, what if we had a LACRA that requires insurance companies to give a percentage of their profits back to a small business microloan fund that operates citywide, that would allow each of our organizations to access those funds in a greater way, so that now we're serving maybe 25 to 30,000 people a year versus the maybe 10 or 15,000 that we serve overall, right? And even identifying ways in which other companies might invest. And I thought, what about diverting some of the public dollars that we know are maybe not being used as, we might think as prudent as they could be, but identifying ways in which our existing city funds could be diverted to allow for a full citywide revolving loan fund that would allow us to then manage those funds, or at least get them to our organizations. So I think, I know that the city has done some work around small business assistance. I know that we were part of that program as well. The funds got cut, I know that the city has invested in IDAs. We know they work. Funds got cut. But if you go to the private sector in the foundation world and we ask them to make an investment that's an entrepreneurial fund, or lay that with some of our organizations that we know have had success, then I think we could do like a 5-year program just to demonstrate nationwide that microenterprise does work. The last thing I want to say is we know microenterprise works. Dr. Yunus, who was the founder of the Grameen Bank program, received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. I'm going to repeat that. No problem.
Please.
Oh, I will. That's okay. Dr. Yunus, who founded the Grameen Bank, which is the founder of the microenterprise strategy that we use, which is peer lending, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for his work in economic justice. So worldwide, this strategy has already been recognized. We knew that it worked. It's been around now for 30 years. It's been in our city for over 20 years now. And it's really important that we stop treating the work that we all do as pilots, as a small program that works, and really expand it so that it reaches the masses and it really can become the poverty elimination program that we believe and know that works. And then we can start to see people come out of that poverty level because they have the income patching, they have the ability to make extra income. We have all the qualitative and quantitative stories that we need. I'm going to send you some extra ones when I send you my comments. We've got pictures of folks. I think we need to sell it and work together with you.
I'm fascinated by this notion of scale. And I think that is something that, if we're truly going to impact poverty, it's like with the school district. I always used to say, they got every program you can imagine. So whenever you say, well, you've got a problem with this, they throw a particular program that affected, 30 students over in Wilmington, and they use that as their response to this problem that's in 450 schools. But they're only doing it in one.
Right.
So we really have to scale up to grow the impact and have greater impact. We know that you said triple the success rate, and I know that you've all increased the success rate. So how do we grow that scale so that it's 60% and 70% on a consistent basis? And yes, it is going to take some innovative thinking. It is going to take exploring some of the things. Now, I would say, with regard to the COIN project and the idea of targeting the insurance companies, first of all, my first question is whether we have the authority to do that. But secondly, typically, if we could come up with ways to scale up that benefit those where the burden lands, I think that's always my best approach to a problem, is try to get the person that is being tapped for something to gain some of the benefit from that investment. And if we could figure that out, that would be a great thing. But I'd love to have that conversation with you. But this whole notion of scaling up, I think, is something we definitely want to explore. And, I think we have the perfect person to work with you on that.
Absolutely. I think so.
Yeah, thank you. With that, Roberto Barragan from the Valley Economic Development Center, who in fact, I mentioned the earthquake and was one, I think all of you were the benefactors in the aftermath of the earthquake of the economic development strategies that we developed here in Los Angeles. In fact, Alberto had something to do with some of that. We couldn't have done it without you. In the San Fernando Valley, as everywhere else, we're seeing some of the same financial crises and this notion of poverty and working our way through entrepreneurship out of poverty and strengthening our small business community are certainly concepts that we want to expand. So, Roberto.
Afternoon, Councilman, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Irene, for the opportunity to be here and to offer some comments on the issue. A couple of points. One, most statistics you're going to see coming from SBA and otherwise indicate that 95% of all job creation, particularly in this current troubled economy, are going to come from small business. Through VDC's experiences, and we will serve 6,000 businesses this year, 60% of the jobs that will be created through these businesses will have a living wage or better to their employees, and that almost 50% of these businesses will offer some type of health benefits, either subsidized or unsubsidized, to those same employees. So it is a myth that small businesses do not address employment needs in a reasonable and long-term manner. But yes, to some of the questions you asked and sent to us, the fact is small business failure is up, in part due to the lack of financing from people's homes. People have used their homes traditionally for supporting their small business, and we're seeing that happening now. And we're seeing that there's a real lack of loans that are secured by homes. And I'm sure Alberto's going to speak a little bit to that. But the fact is the credit crunch is real. We are seeing a doubling of applications to us for small businesses, and we're the largest community-based lender in LA through a variety of microloan and SBA 7A and 504 and revolving loan fund programs. Volume and demand is up because banks are saying no. And these additional failures above and beyond the foreclosure debacle we've heard earlier will cause further unemployment and economic dislocation. 2 years ago, Milken put out a study that talked about the informal economy in Los Angeles and talked about that the informal economy in some cases can represent 25% of what we saw in Los Angeles. And much of that was entrepreneurial. And people, in many cases, people who are not part of the mainstream, first-time immigrants, immigrant populations, and yes, let's talk about the undocumented, they do not have access to employment like everyone else does. And so when we look at basically establishing a foothold, a beachhead in LA, in America, they look at entrepreneurship, and many of these were entrepreneurs. Many of them owned businesses back in Mexico and in Eastern Europe. And they come here to this country, see an opportunity to provide a service and or a product, and will do so. And they will do so without traditional financing. They will do so without licenses and permits. They will do so because there's a demand for their services. And the fact is that entrepreneurship is an option outside of employment, and it is a significant option, particularly in Los Angeles. Increasingly, the businesses that we see, the entrepreneurs that we see, have been in business much longer than they've been in business legally. And at some point during that process, they become legal, and then they come to us for financing. But the biggest challenge right now, we've already been doing this for unpublicized for at least a couple of years, is we're making business loans to undocumented individuals, just like B of A is doing credit card loans. Credit cards to undocumented individuals. Wells Fargo has been doing home mortgages or attempted to do home mortgages to undocumented individuals. That's a real market because the fact is the banks recognize that this represents a million-person, multi-million person population that in an emerging market that needs to be addressed even if our federal immigration policies are schizophrenic in nature. The fact is, on the third question, I don't think the question is what can the private and public sector do more in terms of small business. The issue needs to be what the city of LA can do in terms of small business. Because for all intents and purposes, this city does not have a small business agenda. This city basically just cut small business assistance dollars by 25%, just arbitrarily with almost no analysis and no discussion. We do not have any kind of small business loan programs. Those died for all intents and purposes with the demise of the LA Community Development Bank and have never been resurrected. We currently see, to one of Feresi's earlier points, you have $200 million Section 108 dollars of authority sitting there just gathering dust because the city hasn't figured out how to implement those dollars. If the city simply allocated 25% of that total towards small business and revolving loan fund programs, i.e. programs that might line up to $250,000 to businesses as a direct response to the current credit crunch, you would see, based on the numbers we talked about earlier, we could see 10,000 jobs being created by $45 million in lending being made available.
I'm going to have to slow you down on that point and ask you to repeat, say that again, that part.
Okay.
If
the city currently has $200 million in unused Section 108 authority, if the city simply committed 25% of that, say $45-50 million, to small business lending, to a small business lending program that would lend up to $250,000 to businesses to assist them in growing their business in the face of a credit crunch where they cannot access financing right now. And you targeted a cost per job of somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 cost per job, which yes is lower than the HUD standard, but let's just say as a target, you would have the ability to create 10,000 much needed jobs in the city.
And the federal authority over that?
Section 108.
No, but the
HUD.
the
HUD.
flexibility, the
It is extremely flexible. It can be used for small business lending. It is completely, I mean, it's essentially LACDB used those dollars within its, within that. LA Community Development Bank. Yeah, Community Development Bank. They use those dollars, I bet, very poorly and, and not very well at all. And I wouldn't use that as an example of what we want to repeat.
Do we have to have federal approval of
Yes,
a program like that?
you have, the city of LA has authority right now sitting there, almost $200 million. Community Development Department,
Well, I know we may qualify for $200 million.
you have it.
We have authority to spend it.
You have authority to borrow from the federal government up to $200 million against future CDBG allocations.
I gotta ask Alberto, is that an accurate characterization?
I don't know about the money being there. Roberto says it's there. He's got a good sniffer for money.
No, but assuming
that. But as far as the authority to use it for these kinds of development.
Assuming the money's there.
Yes.
I think the key was that it's against future CDBG funds that we get, which is the way that it worked for LACDB, for the Community Development Bank. Same thing, yeah.
No, but it's only
the same
secured
thing.
by those,
It's only
by
secured
future.
by-
Right.
It's secured by them.
Right.
It's like collateralizing your future CDBG money, but you're making loans to,
So the revolving, it comes back.
Right.
Right, you pay it off.
Exactly.
For community development block grant.
Yeah.
Right.
exactly.
I mean, you want to build programs that basically are fiscally sound, making loans to businesses that are
So
existing
the money,
businesses.
the Section 108 comes from the federal government.
Comes from the federal government.
And what are we doing with it now?
Nothing.
What's the 200 million?
It's like a line of credit that you're not using.
Right.
I think historically it's sort of been, to be honest,
Is there
a
an
political
interest rate
football.
on the Section 108?
Only when you actually borrow it, and the interest rate is, right now, it's, I believe, at 10-year Treasury, which would be about 3.9%.
3.9, and when we lend it out, what do we get back?
Well, you
Get
for example, what you might do is you might lend it out at 1 point or 1.5 points above that to an entity that would, an actual lending intermediary that would turn around and lend it back out again at some spread above your cost.
Most of the economists that I've seen are saying this is a horrible time to borrow.
It's a terrible time to borrow because nobody's lending. If you're a borrower, you
need it.
It's
That's
a
not
great.
the concept. What they are saying is it's a horrible time to create debt.
The thing about it, see, debt is a question of if you have a viable business model. If you have a business model, I mean, right now, anybody who is still developing, whether it's LA Live or something at the port or something in Hollywood, anybody right now that still has a viable business model. Right now, we have businesses being developed all over downtown Los Angeles in the ground floor of the residential buildings. Even now, there's a big residential crunch. The fact is businesses are still opening up because there's a demand for the business. There's a demand for the product and service.
We've had many discussions like this in the past, but why 50 million?
Why 50 million?
Why 50 million as opposed to 200 million? Or
I don't want to be greedy.
I think what might be politically useful or
Politically-
willing,
Doable.
I don't think anybody's going to say to us, okay, we've all advocated for
Well, I
200
think
million.
the
We
one
don't
thing
get
that-
it.
one
So
thing one thing that
you go
seems
for
to
what
be
you
clear
think
is,
you.
one question that I have is, what is the strategy for deployment of this $200 million pot of 108, Section 108 funding capacity that we have. And what you're suggesting is that a sort of guaranteed way to use it would be to establish a rate of return where the money will be recovered in 100%. But in CDBG allocations, we quite often give the money away, and it doesn't come back in any way. So there should be a balance there, a harmony someplace. But we're not doing anything with the money.
Right now, I do believe that there's some attempts to use the money to provide some support to some major project financing in Hollywood and downtown LA and South LA, but no projects that I know of have actually happened so far because of this Section 108 authority.
Okay, I'm thinking that that pool is being looked at, but I will explore the concept. I definitely want to get more information. In fact, my chief of staff is sitting over there, and I'm sure he's taking notes. So with that, I'm going to move forward, if you will. We appreciate your input as we develop the document. We specifically want your response to the specifics of the document, and we'd appreciate those in writing as much as possible.
On the 108, it is a line of, think of it as a line of credit.
Yeah.
Think of it as lending it out to small businesses, and kind of the fail-safe on it is that you got folks like us that are working with the borrower, and our mantra to our clients is to protect your credit, pay your creditors first. And if you look at the success rate...
Believe me, I understand. I helped create the Community Development Bank, and it failed because of some strategies that Mike Hernandez and I tried to incorporate in were not taken into consideration, and there was far too much trust in certain elements that shouldn't have been there. But the concept I get. The point here, well, look at, even if you have a failure rate of 70% of the loans, you should be able to get a net return of your investment. If you had a 50% failure rate of your, did I say 70% failure rate or 30%?
You said 70, but you
meant,
probably meant 30.
Meant 30% failure rate, 70% success. But if you had a 50% failure rate, even though you might lose a portion of your original investment and therefore risk some of the future CDBG dollars, you nevertheless will create 50% success and create jobs and sales tax revenue and other forms of success. Somewhere in there is a balance, and that is a political question.
That's right.
That the city council and the mayor have to figure out, but I think it's certainly worthy of contemplation. I'll try to figure out where
I just want one example. When CFRC was started, we were started by council action as the first public-private partnership between the city and the banks and the community, right? To start our loan program, we were actually given at CFRC, actually when Roberto was there, $1 million of community development block grant money. It was Section 108 money. And 7 years later, it was $1 million. We paid back the full $1 million. I believe we were the first nonprofit to actually do that with the city. So there's an example. It's a small sample, but it's an example of what that Section 108 money can do, and it was all into small business owners. So there is some historical
what year was
information there. From 1993 to 2000. We repaid it back in 1999.
That's when I served on the city council.
Well, there you go. Good idea.
But Mike Hernandez chaired the committee that established that.
We worked quite a bit with him.
It was his leadership. I was the vice chair of the committee.
I remember.
So I'm very well familiar with the history of it. I just want to know where the $200 million of investment opportunity is now. And Alberto has been very patient. By the way, let me thank all of you for staying with us at this late hour. This is something I'm obviously very passionate about, but I know you are too, and that's evidenced by your presence, so thank you very much. Alberto, you have been through many of the same wars, and have worked with the City of Los Angeles to help where you could, and it's greatly appreciated. So why don't you tell us, from your perspective, how we might affect poverty with the resources that you see from your end?
Well, let me thank you for your vision, your personal vision, and your fortitude. It's and actually, with the exception of me up here, you're not going to find, and you know this, a more capable group of people than these three folks here, and they should be relied upon by all our city officials to chart the vision forward. It's an awesome challenge, ending poverty. I told Irene it takes your breath away. I was once involved in a similar effort to make me a good bureaucrat, and it nearly killed all of us in that effort. This is not quite as difficult, but it's up there. I think that one great success that you've had already is really committing people to this effort, and I think that may be even more important than whether we meet every individual goal, as awesome as it is, and you're to be complimented for that. I'm tempted to say at this point, being the last speaker, that everything that could have been said has been said. But I'll say that I haven't said it, so let me take a shot at it. I think the myth is clearly wrong. The myth that small business offers little contribution to the economy of Los Angeles is both wrong in reality, and it's wrong in its future application. We see small businesses, and the three speakers before me commented on examples of small businesses making major impact, and if given an opportunity can make even a bigger impact. I think relative to the master plan that's been presented, I think it's a good document. I thank your team for putting it together. Just a couple of quick comments on it. I think that the data in there, the 2005 data, 940,000 micro enterprises. I think there are more. I think it's growing. I think the four of us here are dedicated to that effort. And as I said, I think there can be even more if some of the barriers to success are addressed. Chief among them being the lack of technical assistance, lack of capital. I think we should all work collectively to eliminate them. I think the 44% failure rate of those micro enterprises that's noted in the report, I mean, I think that's comparable to small business failure rate, and so too is the fact that there's greater success when you have attached, for example, to capital, a technical assistance component. I think the programs that the three of these guys up here run, I think, are exemplary in that regard. I think the tightening of credit in these tough economic times does impact even more the small businesses, micro enterprises, especially given that they've already had a rough time accessing capital and the like. The contraction of budgets, the point that's made in the report, I think of budgets for programs to aid these kinds of businesses. I think that's a major challenge. I think the answer is to continue to work to increase those budgets, to implement innovative strategies, to work together, strategic alliances. That's suggested in your report. We do that all the time. The issue of the unbanked and financial literacy and the predatory practices that are involved in that effort need to be addressed. I was thinking you were telling us about stories. I remember growing up, I grew up in Boyle Heights, and my mother every week going to the localon, she would always say, and I always remembered that phrase, the localon. When I went away to college, and at one point I was 19, I was driving down 5th Street, right about Spring Street. I looked up and I saw, there it was, local loan. And it was some financier, and I never understood what that was. And heaven knows how much my mother paid for what I'm sure was a small amount of money, because I never saw much of it. The sub-issue affecting micro and small businesses, this issue of predatory practices, financial literacy, all of those issues that these folks here are involved with, really underscores the need for a master plan like you guys are developing that is all inclusive, that summons really our best efforts. The question of asset poverty in certain communities really stands in stark contrast to the wealth that really abounds in entrepreneurial spirit in so many of these communities. And you hear it all the time. I got no stinking collateral, but I can work all day, and people are proud of that, and you see that every day. The various recommendations that you included in your program in the document, I think, are outstanding. I think at the end of the day, we need to work more closely together. We're very proud of the record of the SBA, and probably the last 10 years we've financed about 19,000 minority entrepreneurs for about $4.7 million, so many with the aid of these guys up here. I think we need to keep in mind, and the document does a good job of how interrelated all of these issues. We end here with economic development, and I'm sure that's by design, because at the end of the day, the best economic development program is a good job, and our small businesses can provide those. I think it would make sense. I would recommend that we might consider breaking up, I'm sure you have in mind to do that, Councilman, into the four component parts that we've discussed here today, and maybe developing working groups on each of the areas, because it's just there's just so much to do there. I think we probably need, at the end of the day, as this plan gets implemented, to set priorities, to set an order to what comes first, what's more important than the others, given that everything is very important, and to set concrete goals for its implementation and achievement in various stages. I'm proud to be associated with this effort, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak and your leadership on the issue.
Well, thank you very much, and we do have several public comment cards. I don't see. I think they left, to tell you the truth. Ahmed Khan made his statement. John Wall, he sort of used the public comment on the other item to get his comments in, his general public comments in. John Walsh, I don't see, and Sentayehu Selassie, who is also with the taxi workers. I believe his comments would be covered by Mr. Khan as well. So in closing, I think I just want to make some general comments. This is as much a public statement as it is a direction to my staff. The document, I think, first of all, I'm very pleased that we've received positive comments about the document in terms of its content. I am going to take a literary privilege to change the structure and how it's presented. I am very concerned about presenting a document that the people of Los Angeles will understand and will be able to use and will be encouraged by, as opposed to just something that will be set aside and say, oh, well, they finished that task and let's move on. So I would be very encouraged if I could receive from all the participants. I appreciate your comments about the four working groups, but generally you're suggesting that the categories that we've selected are the critical issues that face us with regard to economic development. If there are others, we'll welcome those. And so I also want to sort of express this academic information in the context of myths and ironies that exist in Los Angeles. So rather than just describe a population of Los Angeles, I'd rather say, hey, in the midst of this wealth, as you presented, in the midst of this wealth, we have this irony that we have the largest poverty the concentration of people of poverty in California. And we also have the largest concentration of people of wealth in California, although others might compete with us on that score. But to just put a more humanistic face on the document, so I greatly appreciate all the comments. We are going to take this document back and then rework it as we proceed with the other hearings on the other notions, and at some point, and in that process of reworking, is when we would ask the working groups to engage, and hopefully we can get your comments. I also want to say, and particularly with this panel, that any recommendations that come to us by way of the process, we're not going to wait till we finish the document. I mean, if we get a good idea, it's not as if I can wait for the document to take action. The people of Los Angeles cannot wait for us to take action just because we're waiting for a document to come forward. Obviously, there are elements to the document that will challenge. The city of Los Angeles will challenge people in various segments of the community. So we're not expecting everybody to embrace this document 100%, but we generally want to present this as a statement for the City Council of Los Angeles. But if an idea does emerge during that process, I'm very pleased to take advantage of that and move forward as quickly as possible. Your idea about the $200 million, I don't know all the I don't know who all has their eyes on that pot at this particular moment and what the politics involved in that are. But it certainly is an intriguing idea that we will explore from the perspective that you presented. I may want to explore it for other reasons myself. But
We should go get it right now.
well, I think
We're in the building. Right.
I think the question it's sort of I sort of trapped you into an answer, Roberto. But the reality is that when you can get a loan at such a low interest rate, now's the time to take it, because you're not going to get a better interest rate. The question to me is, if we have access to $200 million in cash at less than 4% interest rate, anticipating that at some point the economy is going to grow, I just don't understand why we wouldn't take advantage of that loan to solve some of the immediate problems that we're having in the city of Los Angeles.
Councilman,
I don't want to speak out of line with my colleagues and the mayor, of course. I don't know what plans they may have on the table that they are working on as we speak relative to those $200 million. But I'm certainly going to explore that, not just in this context, but in general. So I appreciate the suggestion. And other ideas that you have that you think might help immediately, we'd certainly be willing to explore, and I'd be happy to do that. So finally, just let me say again, thank you for your participation. And you have always been there when I have asked, and I appreciate that. And more importantly, you've been there for the people of Los Angeles in your own individual capacities. I'm speaking to this panel, but it's also reflective of the other panels. But also thank you for giving respect to my simple notion that we can end poverty in our society. This is a discussion that, coming from experts like you, validates the notion, and I hope will inspire others to catch the fever, so that they, in some way, shape, or form in their own lives, will commit to doing something to end poverty. And that's really our ultimate goal, is to first teach people to believe that we can end poverty. You have ended poverty for many people. You've seen it happen. And we want to tell the world about that, and we want them to believe it, because not because Richard Alarcon says it or because he believes in it, but because we've done it. And so we absolutely rely on the anecdotes, the positive stories, but also some of the negative stories that are necessary in order for us to move to the next scale. So thank you so much. You have given us much food for thought, and more than that, we are going to change our document as a result of many of the comments that were made today, and I want to thank you. Finally, let me say thank you to Channel 35 for being here, for your patience, and I'm an hour and 20 minutes way beyond what I promised. Although that's not unusual, I nevertheless want to thank you and apologize at the same time. City staff, thank you so much for being here. My staff, my interns, you guys are awesome. Thank you. And I hope you really get a sense of what impact we can have by creating a document that's never been created before. So thank you all. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.